welcome to Varn Blog, and today we're talking music and art with Conan Neutron of Conan Neutron and the Secret Friends, as well as Protonic Reversal podcast about music, as well as Night Extravaganza about movies.
And that's all the time we got, folks. We didn't get through the intros.
So you're touring again soon.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's I mean, it's been kind of a soft footing it forward for what I can only assume is obvious reasons, but it's basically been like a missing limb, if you will, that has been grown back. Since the CDC's official diagnosis of the pandemic is live, laugh, love. So it kind of is what it is now. Everyone just gets to take their health and the health of people around them into their hands if it's important to them. And which is the most dour way of basically saying, come out and see us play on tour with McCluskey.
Yeah.
but you know me, I'm a paragon of dark humor. So
yes, that's true. I mean, you're not quite as dour as me, but that's actually, that's saying something.
Probably one of the reasons we get along, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. There's only one person on this who's ever been on this show who has been so bleak that even I was like, damn, and that is really? Dr. Kuba from the TIR crew. And that was talking about Palestine. And while I agreed with him, even I was basically so taken aback by how dark the prognosis was that I was just like, I'm
hope.
depressed.
Yeah, it's like the end of like Dancer in the Dark or something, where you're just like, oh my god, that was great, and I never want to interact with that art ever again.
Yeah, exactly. It is like I'm a Pasolini film, particularly late Pasolini, and Dr. Kuba is a Lars von Trier's film when Lars von Trier is depressed.
Right, when he's really feeling it, yeah, for sure. The only meaningful interaction I've had with him, other than here and there, is he was on one of the Movie Night Extravaganza crossover episodes we did with This Is Revolution. We picked one of my favorite movies, The Player, in and of itself a deep, dark, black comedy where goodness is punished and evil is rewarded, and he didn't seem particularly on the downer side for that, but to be fair, I picked a pretty downer movie for that. So it's pretty hard not to, but he's a smart dude, tell you that much.
Yeah, he knows the stuff about international politics,
which I'm like, again, not that anyone's consulting a rock musician for his opinion on politics, but I do happen to have something of a history with it, have written policy position papers for candidates, and have worked on campaigns, and was part of the original OG political blogosphere before that became a joke. But I have a deep respect and reverence for folks that do live it and walk it, whereas I would never call myself a dilettante with it, but it's certainly not my raison d'etre anymore. But
yeah, we talked about this last time you were on, about the strange overlaps between political advocacy and the music world. And by strange, I mean that like as a politics writer, I actually got my start reviewing CDs and then books. It was like
nice.
Like that's
for the uninitiated. There were these things called compact discs that we actually sell a good amount of compact discs still, by the way. So.
Well, that makes sense because streaming services are increasingly unreliable. Although to bring that up, you have an EP out.
Oh yeah. Let's get this out of the way. Yeah. Dangerous Nomenclature. So this is the latest Conan Neutron and the Secret Friends record. It's actually a split with a band called the Erratic Retaliator Strategy. We picked 3 song titles, and each band wrote a song to the song title. They sound nothing like us. They sound, if anything, like a cross between like Tom Waits and Men's Recovery Project or something. Like, it's pretty. So I knew that no matter what, it was gonna it's not gonna sound alike. But yeah, that's finally available on vinyl, which is the format that moves more than anything as far as physical product goes, and has been available on CD for a bit. And it is the first of 4 Conan Neutron Secret Friends releases that should be happening over the next year and a half. So that's very exciting because the first song on it, The Commuter, actually there's a video for that coming out, or actually it might already be out. I'm futzing with the timeline here. Mark Borchardt of American movie fame, noted filmmaker and sort of like Milwaukee icon. He did the video for The Commuter. We're really excited for that, for people to finally see it. We worked on it over like the late spring, summer. And yeah, more stuff to sell. It's literally just like I talk about touring in like this day and age as basically running around with a traveling Etsy store.
I mean, but that's the purpose of touring. I mean,
yeah.
I had Jason Miles on recently, although I believe that episode's actually going to come out after this one.
Jason, who has in the past played in the live incarnations of Conan Neutron, The Secret Friends.
Yeah.
That's how I know all you people.
Yeah. That is how you know me. I mean, is Forrest and Jason. Yep. And I think...
I know Forrest through Jason. It's like there's a straight. Well, and he used to have me. So that's what's funny. He used to have me on a lot for This Is Revolution before he kind of like went legit. Like there's an episode where I just kind of break it down for like Wisconsin politics. There's one episode that I have a pretty strong case for postal reform that I brought up that now is actually fairly mainstream now, but yeah, at the time, like that, I guess it's 2020. That year was a crazy good year for sales, which is great, but it also was just getting things from point A to point B became more and more unreliable and expensive, and that's something that a lot of indie labels and artists, it was affecting their livelihood and their bottom line, but it was almost impossible to get anybody in Congress to pay any attention to it. But yeah, episodes like that, again, before they had like, legit cred, I would come on and run my mouth on that stuff. And it was great to have the platform. And in fact, I even brought this up last night because we're going to do an election month for Moving Extravaganza. And we're going to have Bob Roberts on for one of them, but it's going to be on election night because it's a Tuesday. And I was like, oh, we can do election results at the same time. That'd be funny. Like nobody's like really done that because I did a special with him. I don't think it was canonically This Is Revolution, but on the 2018 election, Jason and I live streamed those election results where I might add 100% nailed it for the House of Representatives, like the races, like called it, like should have placed a bet. Didn't for the Senate, but
yeah, it's harder and harder to call elections. I'm actually usually really good at it, and because I have a poll correction bias that assumes that everyone is lying to themselves, and to adjust the polls accordingly to who would be most likely to lie to themselves in an election cycle, and I am quite often right by doing that.
The self-deception curve.
Yeah. Yep. Totally ascientific, but
yeah. But that's the thing about especially modern poli-sci is like there's no science to it anymore. It's almost chaos theory personified. And if you don't bake that into your forecast or whatever, then you aren't playing with the correct set of cards for the correct game.
Right. And I think the one thing that the Trump election told us statistically is just remember that 47% is not insignificant. Because I weirdly will defend the polls on that because I'm like, yeah, actually, like a 47% chance is not small, guys. Like it's
but of course when you have like half the country that basically doesn't vote,
right,
like it's somewhat understandable, but also it's something to remember that with all of that, never underestimate, especially the American voting public's desire just to, double barrels and just go with the most nihilistic, like FU choice possible. Right. Like, I mean, that's a huge it's lashing out is like what we do best, arguably, as a country.
Well, I mean,
childishly lashing out. That's America in a nutshell.
I'm of two minds about that, because I agree with you, but I've also been increasingly thinking about like I listen to all the Jonathan Haidt arguments or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, the Americans don't have faith in institutions anymore, and there's a whole lot of fuck you regardless. And that's actually a bipartisan trend. But
it's not. Yeah, exactly. It's to be explicitly clear. If I was describing it to one party, I did not mean that.
I didn't think you did around. Actually, but yeah. I want my audience to know that. But I'm also like, you guys kind of sucked, because for a long time there was institutional inertia on your side against this stuff, and you didn't do anything about
it. Sat on your hands. Exactly. Well, but and the idea being that they're so like one of two things: A, they calculated wrong, or B, the fact they were so smug and self-assured in their correctness, and the fact that reason and institutions will prevail, that they were just left with their pants down about it. And either way is plausible, but I think people ascribe it to being like some conspiracy or something. It's like, no, there's no conspiracy. It's more like Veep than House of Cards, and like the elected. Like, these people are white knuckling their way through everything.
Yeah, that's I laugh at that because I lived abroad for almost a decade, for a good 7.5, 8 years, and we go to when we were in Egypt, we would my ex-wife and I would join like the Foreigners Club, which is inevitably full of State Department people and military people.
Right.
And they will talk to you probably more than they should, because they drink at the Foreigners Club. I don't think I heard anything classified, but I probably heard all but. And I remember just being taken aback by, oh my God, these Ivy League people don't really know what they're doing. Like that was the major takeaway. It was like, oh no, it really is just it's like, it's not entirely incompetence all the time. Sometimes it's hyper specialization. Sometimes it's like, I understand this and only this, and the world is got this tied up in 85 things that I don't understand. But you just realize that like, no one's really in charge. Like, they kind of are, but not really. And what the Trump administration did for liberals, that I think that we're going to be processing for a long time, because it hasn't really been reestablished even under the last couple of, like, as we say this, Biden's actually turned 2 years of defeat into like a month of but not totally defeat. And but I think there's a whole lot of, we haven't dealt with how fragile the entire institutions were since actually probably the late 1960s and early 1970s. And we've been kind of coasting on, well, if Reagan didn't destroy it, it's okay.
If the multi-decade assault on these institutions hasn't completely destroyed them, then they're probably fine where they are and they don't need to be shored up.
Right.
That's an interesting logic, man. Imagine if you did that in warfare, right? But
well, sometimes it seems like we do, but
I guess that's, good point. But I think you bring up a good point also, because with the State Department people, as long as they very confidently and authoritatively state their position, it's like, well, they're very serious people. This is the foreign policy. We must listen to what they say. But the left does itself no favors by basically being not ready for prime time with any kind of foreign policy that isn't don't wage war. Like, well, what happens if you're already in a war? Then what? Oh, well, I mean, like Jill Stein, like, absolutely shat the bed. And like, let's not just call it the Green Party. Look at Gary Johnson. Like, I mean, if you, the one advantage that they had in that election was that, okay, they're getting platformed and like reaching a wider audience. And it's like, did you not realize that the American media is obsessed with foreign policy? Did you not notice that? Like, your entire lifetime living in this country and on this planet, like, maybe have an answer, maybe do like a modicum of research about it, or at least have your people do it. And they weren't ready, which just goes to show you the unseriousness of the third parties that exist within America right now. I mean, it's just, again, if we had a coalition government, like where they had to at least like, team up, right? Like a parliamentary system, maybe like there would be like more representation and more action.
Right. They'd at least have thought about it.
They would have thought about it. Exactly. It would have crossed their minds, even if they don't have the answer. Yeah.
Yeah. This is actually something to mention Dr. Kuba again, and that I talk a lot about is like, look, I'm an anti-imperialist like the rest of you. I'm anti-war like the rest of you. You don't have a policy for how we detangle all this. You haven't thought about like the fact that, I don't know, because of constitutional limits, our entire world trade structure is literally built on the blue water capacity of the U.S. Navy. Like, and it has to be partly because you do need some force for that, but partly also because our constitution's weird and we literally can only do imperialism through the military and then maybe some auxiliary stuff backdoor through the World Trade Organization or the UN. And I'm like, and if you just made that go away, most of the planet would starve, not just us.
It would fall apart immediately. Yeah, it's complete house of cards. Yeah,
right. That's why, like,
which nobody wants to hear. Going back to that negativity thing, literally nobody wants to hear that, but it's 100% true. And that's what I find so funny about like the conspiracy theorists, that like they're ascribing some like comic book movie based evil to it. It's like no, you're getting this wrong. This is honestly thoughtlessness and gross ineptitude.
Yeah. It's thoughtlessness, gross ineptitude, inertia, and
hubris. A little bit of hubris.
I think the reason why the U.S. usually is caught with its pants down is we are hubristic. But I'm reminded that Europe is too a lot of the time.
You think?
Yeah, but it's funny because in the last year I've basically been like, there's not a country on earth right now that seems to actually have everything under control, and as soon as one does, and we talk about China, which I don't want to go into too much about, but like I do consider China a fairly responsible power as far as like how it, and even it's been caught with its pants down. They
had it on lock for a pretty good while, and actually a friend of mine who's back in the U.S. now, but was an expat living abroad and living in China during COVID. Was like he was giving me like all the updates, and it was basically they treated it like it was a pandemic. and they reacted accordingly, but then again, it's not like they say that they don't have their problems, as evidenced by smartest person in the room, Nancy Pelosi, going in and just poking the bear about Taiwan, where it's like, yeah, maybe don't do that. Maybe like, I agree with you, and I agree that they should be free, but maybe don't just like throw a grenade into a room and close the door. Maybe don't do that. But by the same token, it's like it's crazy that. Okay, so that's the level of like the representation that we get from Congress about humanistic foreign policy, right? Just enough to antagonize and make the problem worse, and not to actually present any solutions for it. Great,
right? I mean, the whole Taiwan policy is complicated because it's
very complicated. Like, I mean, that we could have a whole show just for that, right? I mean, certainly, I would be the least qualified person to be on it, frankly. Again, as the one who talks about it, not qualified for foreign policy, I am. But being an autodidact, I tend to read a lot, and I retain something.
On Taiwan, I'm always struck by everyone's opinions on it being like, you've really only heard part of this story.
There's a lot to it, man. It goes back like for a long time.
And so, I mean, former Portuguese colony, but also that there's been several raids of Chinese settler colonialism there. There's the KMT's policy there. There's the fact that sometimes the KMT, even for their historical hatred of the CCP, will occasionally, or the CPC, whatever they're calling themselves in English today, occasionally will be the pro-China mainland party, but only for a little while.
Just what it suits their needs. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's very confusing. And I follow it, and it's confusing. So I became invested after a bunch of visits to Taipei, and
Oh, cool.
In Beijing when I was in. Yeah, I've been to both. And I will say, you know, for all the problems of Chinese-Taiwanese relations, China will still let me go into the country with a Taiwanese passport stamp, which is not true for a lot of other countries I might have a passport stamp from and go somewhere else in. But yeah, I mean, the whole thing, I was, because I was like, even Joe Biden's telling you he doesn't want you to do this.
Yeah, he's like, hey, maybe don't.
Anyway.
Yeah,
like
maybe don't do that.
Yeah, it's just like, and the thing is, it didn't just complicate our relations to China; it complicated our relations to South Korea.
Oh, the whole region. Yeah, I mean, it's just like when I said grenade in the room, I meant for the entire region. I wasn't just talking about China. Yeah, I mean,
because South Korea's got to navigate. Even the current conservative government has to navigate pretty strong trade relations with both the U.S. and China. I mean, you know, but to get back to leftists talk about all this, and then we can actually talk about touring, because I actually think again.
Let's bring on the rock musician to go talk about complicated, like internecine Southeast Asia politics.
Yeah, it happens.
I mean, you could do worse. At least
actually, I can do worse by certain left pundits.
Oh, shots fired. I agree. By the way.
Yeah. You know, the left has been in trouble lately because what we see on Twitter has mostly been us looking at the absolute worst shit shows of streaming organizations and cults. But it's kind of because, like, outside of New York, and I want to give our New York DSA people some pats on the back, but outside of New York, the DSA has not had a strong showing. It doesn't seem to really know what to do with the current Democrats.
Other than fight amongst itself, of course.
Yeah.
Which just should be baked in, being a leftist organization.
Right. And, you know, and the drama with, you know, progressive on progressive fight in New York, and the progressive host, who I won't name, lost, but which I'm not sad about. I would be under different circumstances, but I saw no reason for, like, the left to split the left vote for some reason. But anyway, back to my point is, even though there's a DSA convention coming up, even though we've been mostly talking about weird stuff like Black Hammer, the Caleb Maupin stuff, I mean, it's been, so what that tells me is that it's a distraction from the fact that we don't really have answers to a lot of these questions, particularly on geopolitics. I think the geopolitical situation with NATO right now is very complicated for people to wrap their minds around. Like, it's
complicated and bleak, which is a terrible combination. Either one of those likely to get people to tune out, but
right, exactly. And I mean, and it more or less has gotten people to tune out, because Russia, if you're a Russia stan, Russia hasn't done as well as you would have predicted. If you're a Ukraine partisan, Ukraine's not done as well as you would have hoped.
Beautiful photo shoot, though. Great usage of tax money. I don't want to ever hear about how we're going to pay for it again.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I was hearing that today, and I'm like, okay, over the course of what the next, the student loan thing over the next, I don't know, couple years is going to be at most a deficit tack on of 260 million, not a billion. That's a lot, but exactly. I just want to
it's a drop in the bucket compared to what we're sending over just for war efforts. Support. Support. And some of that's like, what do you think that means? Like, you remember that? Go ahead. Sorry.
50% of it's going to contractors, at least.
I was gonna say, it's enriching a bunch of people like that they do this for a living, and this is their livelihood, right? And the fact that they continue to make decent enough movies about it that like show it, and then people just never make the connection where it's like, yeah, what do you think that is? You think that's just like a flight of fancy? Like, that's something that doesn't happen like every day? You think that isn't something that like a massive portion of quote unquote defense budget is going for? Like,
Yep.
like they managed to have that be complete abstractions, like yet everyone suddenly becomes well, there's no administrative ability to handle that when it comes to universal healthcare, because we'd have to create a whole administration for it. And like, I'm sorry, what? Like, you're an expert on this, but you don't understand what like foreign aid actually does a lot of the times for this kind of thing. It enriches a bunch of like Dick Cheney's is what it does.
Yep. Particularly after the end of military Keynesianism was a one kind of social welfare project that was sort of allowed after Reagan. And
that one was successful. Allowed and successful. Yeah.
And it was quietly strangled in the second half of the Bush administration, and barely anyone noticed. And we know that because we're learning now, and this is what I said, the 50% of contractors, even if it went directly into the U.S. military providing this stuff, we've now learned that most military support is basically mercenaries. Now, when I say mercenaries, I don't mean necessarily fighters. It might be your cooks, but that's what we got. So when I'm hearing all these conservatives get all like, angry about the student loan problem, or Larry Summers being like, well, it's going to add to inflation, but maybe we should do it anyway. And I'm like, well, there's a lot of stuff that adds to inflation that you're not saying anything about. So
of course not. It's but we don't talk about that. We like those things. Well, and again, as I mentioned, like I took like half a semester of junior college and dropped out because it really wasn't for me, which is hilarious because at the time it absolutely wasn't. But like I would probably get a lot out of it now, right? But but I've continued to like study and like learn and pay attention to all this kind of stuff as like just general betterment and hobby, and most of which is just to follow the money, right? Like of like, you want to understand why your government is doing the things you do, follow the money. Like,
you understand that the federal government is basically an insurance plan that kills people,
right? Exactly. Well, that's baked into the design. Exactly. Right.
All it can really do constitutionally, to be honest, is occasionally do block grants, pass some legislation and ensure the currency, and then blow stuff up or do entitlements. And I'm not against entitlements, but I'm just like, you guys realize that like most of the stuff that touches your life, and actually this is kind of important, is handled by municipal and state governments who don't have currency sovereignty.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have any. They don't have any.
They can't print their own money
to do anything intrinsically themselves. Yeah, it's. Well, and it's. Look, everyone
nothing works.
So. Everyone's very quick to knock things like Pravda and like talk about it's the Pravda of this country, this and that. But it's like the corporate media is like so. They have it so finely honed, and they have it so finely honed in the way that like. They're believers. Like anyone that is like a media person in America, they are absolutely political, but they're not political necessarily about like one of the parties. It's about the corporate agenda of both of those parties, and that's something that I'm amazed that it's like with the right wingers, it's like, oh, you're so close to getting it. You're so close. You're so close. Like you're mad for the wrong reasons, but you're so close to like seeing the actual problem here. And it's just no, and then whatever, it turns anti-Semitic or something. Or like, all right,
yeah,
they're not actually lizard people, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, elites become Jews,
or exactly, and
or what? Substitute some other personage, Latinos, whatever. But like, usually,
Bohemian Grove,
yeah, usually Jews, occasionally Muslims, both Semites, sometimes Catholics back in the old days.
Well, there's a near pathological need for the other amongst right-wing politics, and it's been interesting to watch that like seep into the Democratic Party, right? But it's hyper specified and woke, so then it has to be like, oh, it's and a lot of it has to do with just not wanting to take blame. Not to turn me back to politics, but look at what the Clinton campaign. Roth, right? The 2016 campaign with that the vase fell and shattered a million pieces. Bernie Bros, they did that.
Yeah, like Bernie Bros are Russia, which is not to say there wasn't Russian interference in the election, but there's always foreign interference.
There's always foreign interference, exactly. And by the way, if you don't like foreign interference in our elections, like, then first of all, like, pass some baseline modicum of election integrity legislation, because central tabulation has been basically unguarded with the default passwords for a couple decades now. And here's what's so hilariously screwed up about the Trumpists, right? They're mad about things that have actually happened, but it's not the elections that they think it is. And it isn't the way that they think it is. But again, they're so close to getting it. It's like, no, there's a thing that you're like should be mad about, that you're very close to. But the thing is, that, and unfortunately, is not going to provide the desired result that you want. So you will never address it that way, and therefore you will move not the needle forward, not even like one iota.
Yeah, it's a very frustrating thing to see. And what gets me about it, I'm not trying to win over right wingers. I'm a former right winger. I actually tell people that, like, as a former right winger, it's kind of a waste of time.
You have to, like, there's so much of it that's like circle of trust, like that.
Right.
What is it? Meet the Parents movie.
Like, people will be de-radicalized all the time, or de-right wingized all the time, or whatever. But it's not something you can target and do. And if someone was trying to target me back then to become a left winger, I would have thought they were dumb, particularly because of the way they tend to do it.
Which is so tin-eared and so just like ham-handed, where it's just like, why do you think that would work?
Right. So you're going to pick up right-wing talking points and then like sneak in socialism somehow, or back in those days it was,
I'm sure that'll work. Yeah.
Some other thing. But, and I'm like,
and always so smug too. That's the other thing. None of that can ever be done to anything that isn't just like weapons grade smugness going on with it.
Well, so I'm always just like, talk to people like they're people. That's actually part of the ethos of the show. And I'm maybe not as absolute as free speech as like Doug Lane or even Ben Burgess, but I'm not generally one of these people who says you shouldn't be talking to conservatives. In fact, you need to understand them. You need to have a better model of their mind than you probably do. But where I kind of draw the line is people who misrepresent their politics are not worth talking to, and you can tell eventually. And the other thing is that I tell people, don't try to tail these movements and then like do the bait and switch towards socialism. And I think even sometimes Jacobin does this. And I'm like, you need to just talk to people straight up. There's going to be things we can agree about. There's things we can't. You don't know what seeds you're going to plant, but trying to like, I don't know, let's engage. What's one of them? I guess let's tepidly defend Alex Jones so that maybe a right winger will see that we're anti-systemic and they'll take us seriously. It's like,
which is like, yeah, that sounds great. Why don't you also spit into the wind while you're at it?
Right. Like that's not going to work. Reach out to the craziest amongst us first. And come on.
It's going to work out great. It's going to be aces. Well, I mean, and it's ridiculous that anyone would think that would work, because again, like, well, and this comes down to also what I would call the New York Times advocated ruinous empathy too. Like, remember all the think pieces after Trump won about how of these Trump supporters and how everyone should understand them, this and that. And it's like, not, I'm sorry, did you not understand them? Because I grew up around those people, and it's like, oh, I understand them all right. Like, and like, it's not what you think it is. There's no nobility there. Like, no. I'm not saying they don't have a reason to be angry, and I'm not saying it isn't a sad story that they're focusing in all the wrong places, but I understand it just fine. And like, you don't need to have more empathy for those people. You need to understand, which is different. Right. And I think, unfortunately, leftist politics has a tendency to equate the two, understanding and empathy being the same thing, right? Which is also, harkening back to something I know you and I both agree on, not understanding the concept of a temporary ally.
Right.
Liz Cheney is not your friend. Liz Cheney should not be advocated to run for president by like prominent, like, Democratic thinkers. Like, don't fall in love with Liz Cheney. Like, she's just because she was something useful asset for something that you agreed with doesn't mean that she's your buddy. She's still a neocon. She's still one of the worst people in the world.
I probably would go further than you and say that's probably true for about 60% of Democrats too.
But yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, look, all day long, I want to name names. I'll sit down with the list. I'll escalate all. But like, it's just that.
But the Liz Cheney revival,
but that's just the latest one. It's like there's been so many. There's been so many.
The most egregious one is
John McCain.
Yeah, John McCain and George Bush sanitization. Yeah. That gets me. I have a hard time forgiving that.
That's because we lived through it the first time.
Right.
We talk about this with Andy all the time. Where we talked about we did the Adam McKay movie Vice, a movie Night Extravaganza. Right, which I was like, just realized this movie's probably going to set me off on a few incensed rants, and like, no, that's fine, we do all the time. Like, no, you don't. I don't think you do understand, but you'll get it because it did set me off on a bunch of incensed rants, and I think it's only an okay movie, but if it had to exist to basically have a whole nother generation of people like understand how just truly reprehensible and horrible these people are in a slightly different way than the reprehensible and horrible people are now, but now half of the Project for a New American Century is on cable news as featured guest anyway. So like, I guess that's just like, no, they're good now. What? No, they aren't. They're still horrible. Haven't forgotten.
There's only one neocon I've ever given one former neocon I've ever given anything of a pass to, because it's the only one I've seen evidence of actually not still being a neoconservative, and that's Francis Fukuyama. Everybody else, don't trust. Why?
Yeah, they're fundamental. I mean, they wrote it out. They made an organization, wrote policy position of what they were trying to do, and it's all right there. So again, in those early 2000s, to be told that wasn't the case, it was like, I'm sorry, they wrote it down. Do you want me to send you the website? You can like read it yourself. Like, this is literally part of the plan. I mean, they all but say that, like, and then also we're going to make millions on the contracting. Like it's right there if you have like a modicum of intelligence and critical thinking. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah,
so, like, I'm getting worked up just talking about myself talking about it.
Yeah, that movie's fascinating because I agree that it's not particularly good, but it was particularly necessary.
Yeah.
Because I feel like even the 70s, which in some ways I've felt like the 70s was an analog for now since like 2007. Like, to be complete, I feel like we're in the long second 70s. But because economic malaise that we kind of sort of got out of and then are not getting out of now. Paranoia, political malaise, conspiracism, because of a generation that was somewhat idealistic and trusted institutions. And I think we can overgeneralize about generations, but it does seem to me that both millennials, of which I am maybe one, depending on who you ask and what day you're talking about. And if I am, I'm literally the oldest. Like,
was it geriatric millennial?
Yeah, this is uber geriatric millennial because I was born technically in the Carter administration.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, I think Oregon Trail generation is probably the best signifier. I wish people would use it if we were acknowledged at all, which we aren't.
Yeah, Gen X is barely acknowledged, except for now that they're reactionaries. And
yeah, exactly.
And to be fair, I had this long discussion with Forrest once, so I was like, you got to understand why they're reactionaries, because they actually, like, and then this is not empathy, this is just understanding. The Democrats sucked from 1982 forward.
Yep.
The Soviet Union fell. China went uber capitalist for a while, and people forget how capitalist it went. But guys, it got rid of its public school system for girls. Yeah. Like it mid that privatize people. Like the U.S. doesn't even do that. That's not true now, but that was true in.
They did for enough that as one of their social experiments and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, it was total liberalization, and people talk about it as a massive success. And then I point out, like, even during the Cultural Revolution, whatever you think about it, China was actually still having a gross in life expectancy. They stall out in the 80s up through the 90s in China until about 15 years ago. And I'm just like, so everybody, but that's what everybody saw. So it looked like there was no left to begin with. And you occasionally have some wild-eyed weirdo like what I thought Bernie was going to be treated as, because we lived through this time period.
Yeah.
It had been
He's going to be like the modern day Dennis Kucinich.
Right? Dennis Kucinich from Mike Gravel in 2008. Yeah. Right. We're gonna get spanked and we're gonna feel stupid, and like it's gonna be like, what, there will be, the Green Party got more votes than us in the primary. Like it's wild. And then you also, I think people forget how wild the third party movement was, because I'm like, the Reform Party first had Ross Perot, then had Nader, then had Pat Buchanan, challenged by Donald Trump, which people forget.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump was the more liberal candidate. Then you had the Constitution Party. We didn't even talk about them because they were nuts.
God. Yeah. And now the only time people think of more is that Senate campaign. The fact that like, oh yeah, he was very friendly, like too friendly indeed with like little girls. But it's like, yeah, that dude was he was gonna run for president. He was the Ten Commandments guy. Yeah, like he was the guy that like, we're gonna have a Ten Commandments monument. No, you won't. Actually, yes, we will. And then I'm gonna do it twice. And like that's he was like a hero amongst those people for that. The theocrats, the theists.
Right. It was weird. I've had people argue with me about the danger of George Bush, because they're like, well, George Bush wouldn't put gay people and trans people in the camps. And I was like, personally, no. But I want to remind you that in 2004, that Dick Cheney, who had a lesbian daughter, was pushing gay marriage bans in most states and got them through by even in states that were kind of semi-progressive, by ambiguous wording a lot of the time. Yep.
Absolutely. And
you were totally willing to sell people out. People like, come on.
I mean, what's crazy is that like Lee Atwater's tactics kind of became normalized and finally honed even. It's interesting if you're able to look at it historically and take emotion out of it, but it's maddening because unfortunately the Democrats have been using the same playbook for 30 years.
Yeah.
Like pretty much ever since like the House got taken over. Like, forget it. Like, they haven't advanced one day. They still don't understand the concept of frame language. Like, how long has it been? How many printings of Don't Think of an Elephant are out there now? You know?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's something else. I actually, this is one thing
and I don't think it's gonna change until they like retire, unlikely, or die out. No, not to be crude.
And I'm actually worried about even that, because the longer that these freshmen like squad level senators are, no, not senators, we don't have any Congress people are in there, the more
likely, I guess, kind of. I mean, he's kind of sort of like, it's kind of right. He's a little inscrutable. It's hard to tell him out, but I think he's been more interesting than I expected him to be.
Right. And I don't say this to you know to shit on the squad, but their politics will moderate. Because I remember the Progressive Caucus from when I was a kid. Yeah. That's the people who produced Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi was fairly radical in the 80s.
This is interesting because a lot of people don't remember that it was Hoyer versus Pelosi. And Hoyer was from the moderate caucus and Pelosi was from the progressive caucus. And you say that now and people are like, and like the recoil as if like a vampire was like shown a cross or something. But like it's 100% was true. And again, the positions were there, and it was seen as like the closest thing we can get to a coalition leftist government, which is hilarious because it's more like a coalition corporatist government. And that was her first round as speaker before they blew it by, well, anyway,
by a lot of things.
By a lot of things. We're not getting it. We don't need to get into that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's I know this is like Gen X speaks, but it is important to have the
this is why people tune in. Generation we don't care about. Let's see what they have to say.
Yeah, the small generation, which I like to remind people is that the Zoomers are the same size. And I do, this is where that whole first is tragedy, then it's farce. And I don't mean to call the Zoomers farce, but there's a trend here You have an idealistic generation that's large. The difference between millennials and baby boomers is millennials saw the uptick of American wealth, and they grew up in that, even though it was beginning to fray even in their childhood. Millennials are the same group of people, basically. It's their kids with similar values, a similar demographic size, except they go through the reverse, right? And they aren't the first people to go through it. It started in the middle of Generation X, and people forget that too. But we've been in malaise for a long time, and I have sort of gotten a little tired of everyone telling like, oh, the 90s, that was like economically the best time ever. And I'm like, for about 4 years, and only if you were certain kinds of people.
Yeah, if you were an upper middle class suburban person, yeah, it was pretty good. And like for everyone else, it still sucked. It's just that everyone was too busy celebrating, telling you how great it was. You know,
Right.
Or just calling you a slacker. That's the other thing. Remember that, and pure boomerism of just like, oh, congratulations, new generation. By the way, you're lazy.
Right. But also millennials, you weren't the first to get that either. Or those of us who are in between, I felt like I got it from both ends.
Right, you can both sides. Yeah, I mean, like, and it was constant. It was constant, and of course, since they completely had an utter dominance of culture and media, which it feels like that's still the case, but you can tell that's not the case because of advertising. Because advertising didn't used to be so weird, is the best way I can put it. Which is
right
back when folks that were our age suddenly are like, well, hey, let's make this crazy. Like it takes a lot to get people's attention now. And it sucks that's like the sum totality of our mark made, right? Is like some music and ads, really, because I mean, look at who are the political figures: Anthony Weiner, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Beto O'Rourke. Oh my God, like it's just
Barack Obama is our only major political figure.
Yep.
Of Gen X, and
he's on the top end of it, but he is.
He's a borderline, but I mean that's it. That's the thing. This is what I've like told people. I'm like, dude, the baby boomers are still dominating politics, so much so that they're in their 70s and 80s, and other baby boomers are like, you need to stop.
Exactly. When your own generation are like, step aside, man, it's enough.
They hold, and I don't really know exactly why. I mean, I have my theories. They're mostly based around Christopher Lasch talking about this, but because Lasch's observations in the 70s actually turned out to be true, that the baby boomer generation does not have enough investment in the future to have stepped aside because it doesn't really totally believe there is one beyond itself. And the reasons for that are complicated, but and I don't know if I completely buy them. Yeah. It seems it definitely, at least as post-hoc logic, seems to be true enough. Like,
exactly. If it's not 100% true, it's close enough.
Yeah, the theory was that, I mean, to explain the theory a little bit, was that the baby boomers are growing up at the end of Fordism, when a economy that had been based off of manufacturing discipline moved into an economy based off of soft power discipline. And that this led to a whole Freudian schema change. But when people read like cultural narcissism now, they think they're calling like the current generation narcissists. Lasch actually only applies that to those people in that time period. He would probably say that our generation's in total psychic devastation. So like, we're not even narcissists. We've lost our damn minds.
Have you opened up Twitter recently?
Yeah, I know. I'm like, it feels true. I don't know how true it is. I know if anything feels that true, I probably shouldn't trust it. But it feels true. And that actually is a good place to talk about music.
I was gonna say, it's gonna be the wildest pivot ever.
But I do actually want to talk about music because I've been thinking about the economy of music for a while. Because like in a lot of the arts that aren't super profitable, although unlike film, music is still regionally kind of profitable for somebody. Subscription services mostly. But what we've seen is a bunch of niche scenes come up again like before the dominance of the record players and LP. So like you think about the shift from 60s music into 70s music. And I've always explained this as like the 60s music is great kind of because no one knows how to market music anymore. And so the entire like musician as local artisan thing has died. We now have mass media and we have albums. And we have, you know, I mean, can you imagine a band like Pink Floyd who had a no singles policy?
Yeah, I mean,
still got radio play. Like
it would be impossible.
You can do it now.
Like, which is closer to how early 50s and early 60s were, where, you know, things were done by singles, and then like it gradually, you know, through a bunch of bands, like the Beatles and again the aforementioned Pink Floyd and whatnot, like we turned into albums, right? And then now it's kind of going back to singles, kinda. But the thing that's different right now, the thing that I never hear anyone but myself express, is the fact that you have not just whatever came out that month or that week, you have all of music all the time, constant availability of everything, always. And people experiencing that, like young folks especially, experiencing that in real time, hearing Blondie for the first time, you know, hearing the Ramones for the first time, hearing the Beatles for the first time, and
hearing Kate Bush for the first time,
and all of whatever you're doing, you know, my records when they come out are in competition with that. That is not historically something that we have dealt with, and it's not something that the human psyche is prepared to deal with.
Yeah, it's also you're not just in competition with all of time. You're also in competition with every national culture.
Exactly, and so that's the other thing. As these cultural and regional barriers have also been broken down and interconnected forcefully in some cases, you have just information overload for everything. So therefore, filters become all the more popular. Okay, cool. Except for the problem that the same corporations that in a lot of cases they even have the same names that controlled like the faucet of who gets to be heard before now control those filtering agencies. And there are exceptions to that rule, and I think it's all the more important for everyone to kind of become the media in that way and realize that the thing that I personally think is abhorrent, which is everybody having a voice, everyone shouldn't have a voice, frankly, means that you can actually utilize that to advocate for things of value and integrity and worth. And is anyone going to listen to you or not? Well, you don't know until you try. It'll never be on the same level as like these gigantic platforms that have a different style of gatekeeping than it was in the past. You know, I have an itch. I have an itch that like I'm an album-based artist that has enough fans and enough people that are engaged with it to keep it sustainable and keep it moving just enough. It's never gonna buy me a house, but it doesn't cost money either, and it, you know, it's. But you know,
to buy a house, you need to make over in most cities $200,000 a year. So
exactly.
I just. Yeah, I mean, it would have gone to a house 2 decades ago, though.
It would have. That's the thing that's so. And I think about that once in a while. If I had started earlier, if I had been like, you know, some young prodigy in the 90s or something, it's like, wow, I could actually have like made a real living off of music, a real living, not like like an adjunct living that is you know, supplanted by anything else. But the only way that works, constant hustling, constant creating new merch items. I've characterized it as basically every band has to almost become like an Instagram influencer or something along those lines just to keep in people's attention. I mean, the lottery now isn't like who's hit the jackpot and got the major, you know, the $1 million signing bonus. It's who's hit the lottery of people's attention.
Like,
and chance is a big part of it, and that's the thing.
Who gets either a streaming show putting you in their show, and again, all of musical history is in competition for that, including people who are dead. And
good for Kate Bush, good for Metallica. Both bands have had great careers and like not hurting for listeners. I mean, like maybe like less.
I feel better about Kate Bush than Metallica, but yes,
100%. But like, imagine if those artists had been artists of equal value that people don't know. And this idea of like a meritocratic environment in regards to creative works is patently absurd at this point, because it's just it's a shotgun blast of buckshot of information every day from 1,000 different areas.
Right. So what rises in contemporary music is power law driven. For those of you who know, that means it's literally you can build it by committee. And it's like, okay, we always talk. I remember when I was in high school complaining that all country music sounded like, that was because I was a musical idiot back then. It didn't, but it does now. And
now it actually does. Now you can actually, have you seen the thing where they overlay the country hits and it's like, no, it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same tempo. The changes are the same. The melodies are the same. It's like,
they're all about the same nothing. Like, right. It actually makes me miss 90s country, which was also pretty vapid, but it was less vapid than now.
Less vapid than now, which is saying a lot.
And pop rock, interestingly, or pop, I shouldn't say rock because it's calling it rock's a little bit of a stretch, but like, interestingly, both has that element, but there does seem to still be weird breakouts. Like Billie Eilish is not something is not a breakout that I would have saw coming.
No, same here. And that's genuinely interesting, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah, okay. That's interesting. And there are bands that I thought were gone forever that I've seen come back, that I've been happy about because they've also musically progressed in the time period. It's not like, I don't know, when Aerosmith came back in the 90s and I'm like, you guys are still trying to do what you were doing in the 70s. It doesn't really work.
Pump and
God, that album.
Dude looks like a lady. Whereas I will always stand up for those early Aerosmith records, man. People forget how like hard that band rocked because they just shit the bed so bad. Then there's a Desmond Child period, which is just unholy bad. But yeah, I take the point. Yeah.
All right, well, you know what? Another example of that's going to sound real weird, and I only know about it because I was listening to Hit Parade the other day, and it reminded me of it. Do you remember the genre of freestyle? Yeah, like a whole genre that I feel like I forgot existed.
Yeah.
Because it got so same by the end of the 80s into the early 90s, and
it's like trip hop. Remember, like when people
were same thing. It was like a different. I mean, really different thing. Although
similar in the fact that it was forgotten as a genre,
right, and also similar that it comes out of dance halls.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, that's like the only. I mean, it's like European dance halls at first, but I'm like, yeah, no, it actually is similar because freestyle is like pop that is post disco made for Black and Latin people in New York that gets whiteified kind of by Madonna. And then, and then you have all these kind of breakout artists, like Expose or Stevie B, who we barely remember. But when you hear the songs, you're like, "Oh shit, this was on the radio all the time." And this is where Janet Jackson stole that lick before they stole from New Jack Swing. Okay, I forgot. Like, but there's whole genres of music like that. But what kills most of them is they become homogenized. Like it
becomes easily predictable. It becomes what was dangerous and interesting sounding to begin with becomes a set of rules and terms of engagement that eventually, if they do not offend the listener, they disengage the listener, which may as well be the same thing.
Ska core and third wave ska is another example of that. Like
we were talking, I had the guys from Chat Pile on, and for some reason we got into the 90s swing revival. Do you remember?
That was I do remember that. I remember it because I was kind of into it for a brief minute. Because I like the Stray Cats in the 80s. And
of course. Yeah.
Brian Setzer came back. But like but it was so
that was the one that I was like, really? Like, y'all are listening to this now? This is the thing?
But it,
like, and I get it.
It's about it.
Yeah, but I've forgotten it existed. And so there to be a more 90s swing band revival discourse than I expected for to have them on. But it was a good time. But I had forgotten it existed. Same deal. Same stuff. And like So on that, so with Conan Neutron and the Secret Friend stuff, a lot of people characterize it as like 90s rock, and I always kind of get my hackles up a little bit for that, because like it's guitar based, there's heavy riffs to it, but the more informed critics, when they choose to actually engage with the music, will also mention, oh, but there's interest, there's kind of like new wave transitions and this and that, and it's pulling from basically all of rock music and put through
I was going to ask you a little bit about that, because here's what I hear Ted Leo and the Pharmacist, I hear Elvis Costello, I hear Unwound, which I know privately why that would be, but I hear actually what's interesting is I actually don't hear that much 90s in that, except that it's guitar driven.
For me, it's like you would have a stronger claim for saying it's like 70s, which
and
which it isn't. Yeah,
but
if like 70s music had like if like the Minutemen had become as big as the Cars or something, right? Something along those lines. And so when people say like 90s music, I'm like, I appreciate what you're trying to say, but it's hard for me to not hear the insult in that, because this is very much, for me, music of the now. It's just that people don't have a lexicon for describing rock music that isn't something that's immediately like, what's the band that sounds exactly like Led Zeppelin? Oh God, it's not Wolf Mother was the previous generation's band that sounded exactly like Led Zeppelin.
Oh yeah, there's always I don't know, but yeah.
I can't think of their name
right now. Or it's a crazy subgenre of something like.
I mean, I saw a band play with another band that I was there to see that sounded literally note for note exactly like the band The Birthday Party, Nick Cave's first band, and I was apoplectic because I was like, how could you not accidentally inject some of yourself into this? This sounds exactly like that band, which is not an unknown band. That's one of those bands that like launched 1,000 bands, right? That like, you don't have bands like the Jesus Lizard without The Birthday Party. You don't have like a lot, the Cramps, and to a certain degree, you don't have like the Cramps as we know them. If you don't have The Birthday Party, like, and they sounded exactly like them. And then I was just like, oh, they just don't know, because these like the kids are just like whatever, they're having a good time. And then I was like, well, I haven't maybe tried not to be mad at that, but how do you not add anything new to it? That's what as an artist, that's what gets me. And that's when I see people having success with to me are very cynical sounds and songs, like where it's like, hey, you little maggots, you like this, huh? Great, here's some slop for you. It bums me out, but then by the same token, I have a tendency to make things more esoteric and nuance laden, which is always going to make you like, look, I love Sparks. They're one of my favorite bands of all time, right? But there was a great Edgar Wright documentary that showed why they're every musician's favorite band and why they're not really that well known in the US, but the UK loves them.
Well, that's true for like any interesting progressive band. But
I mean, which is why it's weird when something kind of crazy breaks out even on another level. Like, do you remember that Battles song that like was like really big? Which first of all, it's like 8 minutes long, and secondly, it's a jam. It's a great tune, but it's like that's basically a prog song, and everyone was like dancing around to like this prog song. I mean, whatever. I guess there was like Owner of a Lonely Heart in the '80s. Sure, why there's a precedence to it, but like sometimes like I'm pleasantly surprised. That
it's like how Tool differentiated themselves from new metal by incorporating more and more prog.
Yeah, by just getting proggier and proggier as time went on. Yeah, absolutely. As their audience got more and more insufferable.
Yeah, that's true. That's also true. And their audience is as much as, and I like Tool. I'm a Tool defender, but their audience is more insufferable now than it has ever been.
I didn't think it was possible, but it somehow is. And actually they're friends of friends, and they're lovely people by all accounts. And even when I'm not 100% to what they're doing, it is unmistakable that they are pure creative hearts doing exactly the thing that they want to do. And I always got time for that. Yeah, but their audience is dog shit, and I think they would probably be the first ones to admit that.
Yeah, that's probably true. It's been
the Secret Friends going on tour with Tool soon. No. My friends actually have a Big Business toured with them. All Souls toured with them. They do a thing that a lot of bands of quite lower stature do not do, which is the fact that they will elevate working bands that they like to their audience, which may or may not get over, but from a sheer numbers game, you're going to grow your audience somewhat just by the fact that, even if people are you're in the way of people's favorite band for a lot of those people, there's going to be people that are actually music fans that are going to connect with it. And I'm surprised more bigger bands don't do that.
So working in literature, this is a trait that I think happens in a lot of fields. And it's discouraged in literature and fiction by agents, but it's not discouraged in poetry because no one gives a fuck. So
poetry's about as niche as it gets, yeah.
Right. But the people who've made it will break people out all the time, but the intermediate people are goddamn vultures. So
it's the competitiveness about that gets me. And it's like I see the same thing in music where I'm like, first of all, why are you carrying yourself like you're some prize? Because you're not. You're lucky, if anything. And in some cases, it's work too. But it's.
I mean, the thing is,
the people that have like the highest platform, they're like, yeah, I'm gonna use this to give a shot to these up and comers that or just like we like this band and think what they do is of value and we want our people to be exposed to it.
I mean, and let's think about the cultural importance of that, because I don't like Nirvana as a band. I know that's heresy, but I did when I was 13, but I grew up. However,
one of the bands that got me into everything.
Well, this is it.
That wasn't my parents' music, but the fact that I played music with someone that was in iterations of that band blows my mind now. Yeah,
there's whole genres of music. All right, of obscure regional rock music, like the entire catalog of SST Records, much of Touch and Go Records, etc., that owes their existence to the fact that the first impulse that Kurt Cobain had was to popularize every single weird piece of bizarro music he'd ever heard, regardless of its genre. I mean, like, he was also,
Scratch Acid and Flipper t-shirts, putting thanks in the records to beat happening and absolutely 100%. Like that's a perfect example of someone using their platform for
and I've the reason why we think grunge was a genre and not a place, because I am of the Jason Miles school too, that I can't tell what say the Meekins, the Melvins, Nirvana, Mother Love Bone, and Pearl Jam share other than guitars.
Exactly.
It's like,
sure. What is
in a region? They're from the same region, but
what does Tad and Alice in Chains have in common? And here's that's on the show. Nothing. Yeah, exactly. It's I like one I get compared to the other. But.
Right. Like it's funny because I like both musics, but I'm like, one of these comes out of 70s rock. Yeah. One of these comes out of 80s punk. They don't really share anything other than they smell bad. Like,
well, and then they Sub Pop especially lean into it, like to Tad, give this very sweet, creative, poetic man a chainsaw and let's pretend he's a hillbilly. They leaned into it to sell records too, and it's nothing. It was a media construct. It was a media construct in a way that wasn't constructed with an architecture in mind. It just was constructed, and then they realized they could make their own bands, and that's right. Stuff got really.
There was, like I said, there are kind of two different things that you can call grunge, but it doesn't stay. That's one of the things. The reason why it's not a genre for very long, even compared to these other things, is unlike these other genres that become homogenized. No one could figure out what the hell grunge actually was.
Sure.
Yeah,
exactly. What's the correlating factor for this?
It's it was a region.
Yeah, you got a band like Mudhoney who sound like the Stooges and the Scientists and Radio Birdman, basically, with guitar solos. And then you have a band like Melvins who have just continued to defy genres for and continue to make creatively viable for years and years, even if they're only known for basically doing one or two things, and all of their ripoff bands are just soulless imitators of oh, I know what record you have.
Right, exactly.
I totally know which record you have just by two notes of your music. But yeah, what's the correlating factor? Well, I mean, it's people, as someone who worked in a record store, right? Like some of the stuff is just arbitrary distinctions. Like when does something become like punk instead of post-punk?
Right.
Yeah. What is post-punk? I still don't fucking know, you know?
Well, I mean, anything post, like, what is post-rock?
Yeah,
because I'm like, why don't we call rock post-blues? Like, like,
I don't think I've ever heard that one, but that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I like that.
I mean, it's because, you know, what is rock? Rock is black rhythm and blues and white country being incestuous, mostly actually in Texas and New Mexico, but which is weirdly forgotten exactly where it happened at, and then spreading like wildfire and being adopted regionally.
With regional innovations that
mm-hmm.
you know, then became sort of absorbed and normalized by people, you know, taking the inspiration, or in some cases attempting. I mean, there was a big culture of, like, you know, doing a answer songs and basically rip off songs and stuff like that, and that was a big deal, and which is adorable because now you can't get away with this again. See the aforementioned Everything Everywhere All at Once, you know, where it's like all of music and all of time is all in direct competition with each other the whole time. Like, you can't get away with some like tossed off thing.
Yeah, there's going to be no like Alabama's answer to Neil Young anymore.
Exactly. It isn't possible because we don't have that monoculture anymore. Everything is just everything's completely balkanized. It's balkanized in a way that people don't even realize that they're in it.
Right. Well, that's what's interesting, because I have a theory, Conan, that I want to talk to you about the weird way of post-rentier like quasi-capitalism that we live in regards to artists now. Okay. We don't have a monoculture, but we do simultaneously. What I mean by that is, like, we have a monoculture on Twitter. We have a monoculture of how we interact with music, but we don't have a monoculture of the music itself. We don't have a regional cultures anymore. And because music consumption is so privatized, like, and
with the focus on individual choice,
right, and individual listening consumption too. I mean, like, my Spotify's personalized to me, right? Exactly. Me specifically, not even my demographic group. And while at first that felt pretty liberating, believe it was actually kind of nice to be like, okay, I like Caliphone. Tell me something back in the day when we listened to Pandora.
You're Giant Sand, you know.
Give me Giant Sand. Give me Calexico. Okay, I already knew those bands, but still, but I would go down like, I would find like whole subgenres of like alt country and no depression music or whatever that I had not heard when it was out because I was in the wrong region, or because I was I was just the wrong age. I was too young. Etc. And that at first was liberating, but it's not anymore.
No, because now it's dangerous, because now you have the same bubbles of confirmation bias for creative aspects that you have for politics, which is the fact that you are, hey, you like this? Cool. Here's more stuff that sounds like this. And then like avenues for discovery then are only from, like, you know, corporate promotion or whatever.
The weird thing, the only thing is saving us right now is TikTok.
Which is horrible.
Which is sad. But it's also like, that's how I know who Doja Cat is. Like, to be honest. Otherwise, that was just a weird name I saw on the internet. And
is that a Pokemon? What is that?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's also radio play, in so much that anyone still listens to terrestrial radio anymore. Which most people don't.
Most people don't. Some people do, and I will say, and this is something where when I'm saying this to an audience of people that are maybe not your normal audience. It's still worth doing. And here's why. For the reasons that we're talking about, the reason that this digital hellscape of, you know, constant incessant bubbles that we live in, there is some merit to things like college radio, especially like stuff where it's engaged. It's people that are music obsessives that are sharing their thoughts on
college radio and Pacifica radios that play music, like the local access radios. Those are awesome. Occasionally, I'll also vouch for even commercial radios that have a very weird sub niche. So, for example, which
it has a moment, they have a thing that they
right. Like there's an awesome channel here that's like 80s rock, but it's like there's 2 nights a week where it plays new wave. And it plays new wave that even my specialist asks, because I love new wave.
Right. And you're like,
never heard before.
Like, yeah. And that's
it wouldn't show up in that tonal algorithm on Spotify or Pandora.
Never in a million years. Exactly. Because it's going to always give you the safe bet. Right. It's never going to put it all on black.
I mean, that's how I realized that Randy Newman one time made good music.
Well, and so that's what's interesting is that, not Randy Newman specifically, but that's what's interesting is that I would prefer, first of all, I'm at the point where like I am a music filter, you know, like, so it's not necessarily for me. Like I am the one that turns other people on to bands. And I say that not like to be arrogant about it. I absolutely am. I have a show that features musicians and who I choose to have on there.
You've had like 400 episodes.
Right, exactly. And who I have on, I choose very carefully, whether they're like a known commodity or whether some of the people should know. So like by that nature, I am a filter. And there are other people that are that sort of way as well. But by the same token, like, that doesn't mean I know everything. I'm constantly finding out about new stuff. And again, going back to what we were talking about, like the constant interconnected nature of all of music kind, there's still stuff I'm discovering where it's like, wow, this is really good. Like, what is this? And it's like, oh, this came out like 20 years ago. Jesus. I had no idea.
Right.
You can't know everything, especially like, you know, it's like I talked about with movies, right? There were like a whole long segment of time where I was doing a lot of touring. I didn't see a lot of movies. And so I missed like 15 years of movies, and I basically caught up on them in like the first year of COVID.
So every second tier indie movie that came out between 2009 and 2017, I did not see unless it got Academy Award nominated, because we want to talk about monocultures. Film is worse.
Film is so much worse, and there is almost no platform of any kind that isn't like a niche streaming service that apparently will just dump all their stuff and like call it a write-off.
Right.
Apparently that's a thing, which is wow. That's if there ever was an argument for physical media.
That's I was about to say, I'm now buying my seasons of shows again in DVD and Blu-ray form.
Here's the crazy thing, man. I called this back in about like 12 years ago. But I said in terms of music, and when I said and at the time I used Prince as the example, because I wanted to pick someone that was like, you know, just notoriously like control enthusiast about stuff, but also like unpredictable, bit of a wild card, right?
Yeah, and Prince and Neil Young
that like would just put out a record, and like maybe the response wasn't what they wanted, or maybe like, you know, whatever, like they saw the Red Dog on Tuesday, who knows, they would pull the record and it just wouldn't exist anymore. And then it comes back and it's a different record. Something's different. The mixes are different. The sequencing is different, like whatever. And I said it would start with an artist doing that, and then corporations would realize that they can do that, and they would start doing that for reasons that we wouldn't necessarily understand. So see things like the D&D episode of Community, pulled because of what is one of the characters, like he dresses up like a drow, which means he's wearing blackface, and they mercilessly mock him for doing this as part of the show and as part of the narrative structure. And that was taken down because it, you know, when everyone discovered racism again, they just like arbitrarily took it down, contextless, like without any.
They took down a lot of HBO Max has 3 episodes of the Boondocks that they have erased from history as well.
And that
whole shows of Adult Swim are gone.
Yeah, there's
no current. I mean, I think if you can find a DVD from 10 years ago, you might be able to watch it. But like,
it blows my mind that this is just happening, and like I didn't want to be right about any of that, but that's what I said is like when you are ostensibly renting your content rather than owning your content. If you're not maintaining your own music library, if you're not maintaining your own library of films, which I do still have, but it's like definitely frozen in amber. It's like the last thing I bought was like the Criterion collection of Brazil, which I stand by. But like, there's movies that are like some of my favorite movies of all time that I've seen in the last 10 years. I'm like, I mean,
so yeah, actually, you give an example. Criterion's a good example of that. Criterion, when it changed the content of its channel, just because something's got a Criterion release doesn't mean you can watch on the Criterion channel at all. And I know they did that to keep their physical media business alive, actually, so I'm a little bit more forgiving of it. But there are a couple of movies that there's been rights issues with. One of them's like The Man That Fell to Earth. There's been times with Solo that this has happened where like the Criterion edition's out of print for whatever reason, and it's the only version, and there's nothing else, and now it's not on a streaming service either. And then you have with movies now, you have the fact that you have not just the streaming, like HBO's total streaming loss, but then like if you and I both have done movie podcasts, I don't do a movie podcast anymore, but I did for years. More pretentious films than what you guys generally deal with.
I think we split the difference nicely between like Criterion and popcorn movies. So
right. I was all Criterion or worse,
right.
But
which there was a niche for, It's wrong with that. I could do that. I could do that show, and I wouldn't bat an eyelash about it.
Nope, it'd be fun. It was fun, but and the thing is that niche is now even that niche is overfilled, but because if I had my way, if I was doing a movie show, it would be like really crappy cult movies and then pretentious movies, and I would just alternate between them. But because I have this high and low versus middle brow thing going on. Mm-hmm. But by the end of that series, it became really hard for certain movies for me to get legally. Now I was abroad, so I could get, but you started seeing, it's around 2017 is when I really quit doing that show. Is I'm like, I can't find like it, like between when you asked me to do the movie and when I went to go watch the movie, it has changed streaming services and rental outlets twice.
Right, exactly. It's been sold, resold, rehoused, rehomed, acquired.
Like it'll be on Movie one month and Criterion another month, and then like maybe it'll be on HBO Max for a little while.
Yep.
And there's also this established business model now where you release all this indie stuff in the beginning. Amazon did this, and then you move to a different model and you drop that stuff. And so I'm waiting for that to happen with Tubi, because Tubi is the free thing that's full of now all this indie stuff because no one else is doing it. But I'm like, when are they gonna flip that model?
And grab that back.
And grab it back, and then you don't have a distribution mechanism again. Like, and that doesn't happen as much with music. You're right that it happens, but it hasn't happened as thoroughly, I guess, because the profit margins of music are now so low that no one cares.
Exactly. It's not worth it. It's not worth the time. And so that's where, again, see back when I talk about what I feel like going on tours, just you're being, you get to play the music, but you're mostly a traveling Etsy store.
Yeah.
And I say that like we have like 2 new t-shirt designs for this tour, right? Like my first band, Replicator, like we were around for like 8+ years, toured constantly. I think we had 2 t-shirt designs ever.
Right.
And like and now that would never fly. Like you have to like have something new for the next time you come through, because some people want to buy the record, some people only want to buy the t-shirt. They stream through everything, like, okay, I mean, what is it?
It's hard to justify too unless you're a major artist, also because the ticket prices have gotten so high.
But, exactly. And it's
like I paid $40 to go to a mid-tier bar to see Calexico, and I love Calexico. Like love those guys, and I still forked out $20 for a stupid one-time 20 print poster, which I love, and I have on my wall. You can't see it over there. Yeah. But I didn't buy it because I really wanted the poster. I bought it because I have enough musician friends from when I was a music journalist to know that now if I don't do that or buy a CD, and I bought both, like they don't really make that much money that night. Now, Clux has been around for 25 years. I'm not as worried about them, but if you're a new band,
they're probably doing okay. But no, it's a major difference, and that, I think. So there's things that people can do, right? So if you're invested in that kind of music or any kind of music where it isn't like a super, you're seeing it in an arena or something along those lines, right? It matters, and it sucks to be like focusing on like, whatever ethical capitalism or whatever to save art, but like it really does matter, and it's something that as a cumulative effort, just think about how much you pay for your phone bill or for your internet every month, or for, or to Spotify or whatever, which is like, you see like fractionalized 1/100th of a cent for each play, right? I mean, like I think I mentioned last time, like there was, just for the heck of it, I last time I was on, I think I calculated the last 4 years of Spotify plays, what we got paid out from that, and what we made on one Bandcamp Tuesday, and the Bandcamp Tuesday was bigger. Literally one day.
So all the order artists, even poetry now, we're all surviving off of direct patronage.
It's what's left.
Right.
They haven't found a way to put a middleman in front of that yet.
I mean, 300 people give me money a month. I mean, and to be fair, as a podcaster, it's the first time I made money. Like
for podcasting, fantastic. Yeah,
right. Because before that, I had to quit. There are many podcasts, like, for those of you who don't know, Varn has been podcasting for over a decade. And
as has Neutron.
Yeah. As has Neutron, but you've kept one show and you kept that one feed alive. I had lost so much money on certain shows at one point that I just literally threw the old episodes up on YouTube or Mixology and had to kill the feed. So you can't search them in any pod aggregator and find them now. They exist. Right. They're on the internet.
They exist in some like specious archive.
Yeah, so some specious free thing, or like there's a bunch of episodes of my old podcast, Former People, like on YouTube, one of which went viral that I don't understand why. But
that's the weirdest thing. It's sometimes really arbitrary like that.
It's just like, okay, this one interview I did about Jean Delmont, 10 years ago, went viral 2 years ago for no reason I can discern. And that's literally the example. But most of those things are like, in general, lost. I have put them on now my Patreon feed for those of you who want to give me money. But actually partially for archive reasons, because even if I ever stop the show, I'm going to turn the Patreon on for free, and until Patreon kills it, it'll be there. Right. But all this stuff seems more and more ephemeral, like
and much more happenstance and prone to chance. Like for instance, second Secret Friends record, there's a song called Quid Pro Quo. Turns out that like that was very much in the zeitgeist for like a month and a half. So we got like, whatever, like
you get this weird bump, you made $20.
Yeah, exactly. 17,000 more plays just from that 2-month period of it being repeated ad nauseum in the news every single day. And who could predict that? There's no way you can predict that. That's just like the Jeff Goldblum and Jurassic Park chaos theory like mindset. And you can't, if you're and look, I appreciate all the artists that they made the decision to remove their stuff from Spotify because I guess Joe Rogan. Okay,
yeah, I mean
that was fine.
To me, I was like fine, but I was like, Steve Bannon is still on Apple Music, guys. Like, so.
Your words, man. I was like, if you're going that route, like, I got bad news for you about all these platforms. Like,
so Joe Rogan's he's not the best, but he's actually far from the worst. It's still available on most of these services. So,
well, and like, and I respect anyone's.
Yeah, me too. I mean,
process to doing that. It's just for me. I'm like, I'm cool. Don't expect me to do that. I don't believe in any part of that. Like I'm making it, if it's going to be available for free, it's going to be available on all the platforms, unless it's like, oh yeah, like the Nazi music listening platform or something, like, which, who knows, maybe that does exist, I don't know. And people, well, Joe Rogan's practically there. I'm like, no, he fucking isn't, and I don't even like the guy, but shut the fuck up about Joe Rogan.
Right, he's a milquetoast meathead. He does empower people like Alex Jones, but then so does a lot of other people, including the mainstream fucking media, to be honest.
Like bands had music playing on like stations that had Rush Limbaugh, right? So it's like, right. So was it requirement for them to like take it off of there? Like, and that's what these streaming services are, is like a replacement of radio and a replacement of record sales for people that don't buy files or buy physical media. And it's, and what's crazy is like that endless hyperbole about moralizing what is ostensibly like a distribution model and marketplace, as vehement and crazy as it was for like a few weeks to a month. Now it's just like whoosh, nobody thinks about it anymore, and that's our world now, is that people move on to the next thing. And
yeah, I try not to get too preachy about how like we have another deplatforming moral panic that everyone's going to be really care about for 3 weeks, and then it's going to inconvenience them, and then the media is not going to focus on it anymore, and everyone's going to resubscribe to X, and because
everybody was all mad at Netflix.
I was about to say Netflix is still. I mean, and it's lost
Dave Chappelle. Dave Attell did nothing wrong that I'm aware of. Dave Chappelle.
No, I mean he probably did a lot wrong, to be honest.
Oh well, I mean, sure. And
but
like,
we don't know that.
Yeah, but it's like, I mean, there is no ethical streaming.
No, there's not.
There's no way that you can do that, and trying to behave as if you can is absurd. Like I remember, like when that Spotify moral panic happened, and everyone's like, "Well, what streaming service going to use that like isn't terrible?" I'm like, none. They're all terrible. They're all predatory.
You're like, if you go to Django, that sucks. I mean, like you're like Django. I'm like, I'm going to old ones, guys, that still kind of exist because that's all I got. And
mp3.com, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, it's
subscription Napster. I don't know, like
it's which actually is one of the ones that pays out the best, which is to still say slave wages, but like like it's that's what I was like kept hammering this single point home, because it's like that's something when people remember that I exist when something like that happens and I'm like asked to go on these shows and stuff. I'm like, cool. There is no such thing as an ethical streaming service. It does not exist.
Right.
By its very nature. Like we have to question the idea of if everything throughout all of music's history should be available to us at this level of convenience. Because if we're willing to trade that convenience for actually benefiting the artist in any appreciable or meaningful way, you've made your choice. The question now is like, like which, what color do you want the gun to be?
Yeah, as I was to say, I'm also like, there would be better reasons than Joe Rogan to
I mean,
not just in like, not even for the platforming, just like for ethical practices, what they invest in.
Yeah, like exactly. Well, and that did come out, and that has been discussed and stuff. And I'm like, cool. But if you get down that line too, remember all these mega corporations have gobbled up everything else. So it's like, what, like, and what I love is people like running to Facebook to post about this. I'm like, I'm sorry. You're posting this on Facebook. Are we clear about
or
like,
Twitter? Twitter's
or
not. I know Facebook is going away, but Twitter's still around. Like, and Twitter.
Everybody keeps saying Facebook's going to go away, yet Facebook still endures. It's just that they've lost a lot of people that are worth keeping around.
Facebook isn't going to go away. The thing is,
it's going to be around for forever. It's just pivoting towards being for like boomers and grandparents to be radicalized.
Right. It's
they've absorbed too many competitors. It's just
I was about to say the other thing is like,
we never should have surrendered to the algorithm.
Right.
Period. On any of these things, and that's what we have is full and unconditional surrender with no way to return.
Right. I mean, that's the thing with the, like, people forget the radical. This is one of the ironies of all this. when Facebook was open and free but not commercialized, and yeah, there was all kinds of wild shit on Facebook. It never spiraled. You know why? Yeah. Because its growth was organic. There was nothing compounding it by trying to give you more of what it thinks you want. Yeah. So like, you didn't have. There were more Nazi podcasts in 2011 than in 2015. I know that for a fact. However, nothing was going to be pushing them at people. You had to know how to find them. And that's the difference between Internet 1.0 and 2.0 and Internet now. It is the algorithm. And I don't think people get it, but they don't get it. Because I'm like, you didn't have to censor this stuff when there was no algorithm, believe it or not. Yeah. But I remember feeling ominous about it. There's two things that happened. I stopped doing a literary journal. I kept it's still available on WordPress if you want to find it. It's called Former People. Have a nice day. I don't make any money from it. It's just I publish people I liked. And got interviews with big authors like Christopher Leatham and M. John Harrison and stuff like that. But yes, so I'm going to talk my horn a little bit. It's my podcast. Fuck off.
Hey, it's your podcast. It's your show.
No, you're not judging me. I'm not worried about you judging me. I'm worried about the people out there judging me.
They can go take a flight.
Right. I was like, you have your own podcast. You do the same thing. But
you have to do. Everyone's P.T. Barnum.
Right. Exactly. But I saw it massively drop off in the ability to share when Facebook monetized its sharing service. And this actually created the cesspool of Twitter too. And people are like, why? I'm like, well, Twitter has an algorithm, but Twitter's algorithm is not pay to play. It's even more fucking random. You don't like it. I don't know anyone who can explain Twitter's algorithm to me. I have no idea why certain things show up in my feed. None. But it's not pay to play. But unfortunately, over time, that's been gamed to negative results too, because how you get attention on Twitter is hate sharing, and entire dumb political philosophies of both the right and left have basically emerged from trolling people.
Yep.
Because there's no other way to play that algorithm.
Right.
Right. So
engagement is engagement. So
right.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why, like, I just don't engage with any of the, things that certain people that I'm on shows with engage with, and they seem to get something out of it. I don't. I'm like, that seems like hell.
I will not name names. I love everybody on your show, but there's been a couple times where I've been like, I think you would be a happier person if you stop this, because all you're looking at is the shit you hate. Like,
I have maybe said almost those exact words verbatim.
It's just like, I'm like, and I put this on Twitter this morning, which I guess is his own thing. I was like, how much retrobate, politically immorally shit that I've been exposed to because you guys are hate talking about it so much.
Yeah,
it would be like if I was, my analogy, which I think is funny but also correct. It would be like if Adriana Dorquin and her book Intercourse decided to give us all a copy of Deep Throat so that we understood what she was talking about.
Right, exactly.
That's what you guys are doing.
Yeah, you're elevating the thing that you hate and giving that more attention, and which again, negative attention, positive attention is rewarded the same way now. So if you don't understand that model,
alive, even when they've been deplatformed, like Alex, that's why Alex Jones exists. Like, I love the Knowledge Fight show because at least, if I would tell people if you're going to engage with that, engage through them, because you're not giving Alex Jones the shares. Right. But hate sharing without context for that has kept that man's business model alive.
Exactly, and that goes back to what I'm very fond of talking about. In the absence of people getting justice that they feel is deserved, they've settled for catharsis, and that's it explains everything about our culture right now. It's all catharsis.
Ooh, that hits. I've never thought about that, but yeah, it is like we can't have justice. We can't have no, I have my own opinions about justice anyway, but we can't have we can't have a fair and functional society, but we can get revenge.
Yep, that we can do. So, so yeah, is it any surprises that people are grabbing torches and pitchforks? Yeah, of course they are.
Yeah, I guess the cycle is back around to what we were talking about in the beginning, where we're like, yeah, America has a big fuck you vote, and I'm like, well, this is kind of why.
It's explainable. Like it's absolutely explainable, and I think it's look,
it's not good.
It's not good at all. We have these tools that have connected us in these ways that are not necessarily beneficial for the human psyche, in ways that people are not meant to engage with others, and at a level, constant information that people are absolutely not prepared or equipped to deal with. But none of the needs of the individual are supported, even though the individual is constantly celebrated. Then by that same token, you have a system of complete unjust practices where it seems like the worst people in the world are being rewarded all the time. Well, is it any surprise that you get like an online mob? I mean, it's a natural reaction, and it's, if you don't like any of those things, then you need to start addressing systemically why those things are the way they are. And that comes back to the conversation of private enterprise or public square too, and that's a much larger discussion that I was hoping we might get from the right wingers, but no, it's just more like, hey, we just want the things that we want to see.
Right.
Like, okay. So you don't actually give a shit about justice or equity or actual free speech. You just want to be able to see the things you want to see.
I have a backdoor debate with the Platypi, who are probably going to do this show. For those of you who know, Platypus Affiliated Society is a group of Marxists, and they really believe in bourgeois freedoms. And I'm always like, well, yeah, but you take the right. Look, you know that the left is bullshitting about it because you're all leftists, but you take the right at its face value. I can tell you as a former rightist, but also you should just be able to look. They don't mean it. And maybe individual, like individual non-political operatives. Yes, I have met some conservatives who actually are principled on an individual level about free speech.
Sure.
But like, you got to give me the Ron DeSantis fucking believes in free speech.
Yeah, of course not. I mean, it's look. I mean, catch me on a bad day. I don't believe in free speech. Again, like, I don't think everyone should have a platform. I don't think it's healthy. And I think it just, like, in a way that there are all these tools to make it easier to create art. Cool. Not everyone should be making art unless you're just doing it for its own sake. To do so and to put expectations of reward onto it is it actually denigrates actual artists, and that's not popular either, because everything has to be constant growth. Everybody is a special person whose opinion is very valued and should be expressed immediately on all the various platforms, and everybody should be making art about all those things too. Really? Because I've seen some of this art, and I've certainly seen a lot of the opinions, and we could do without a whole lot of it, frankly.
I think there's a key there though that you talk about for a second that I really want to focus in on, because I think if the incentive structure was different, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah. Absolutely. I 100% agree with that.
Like, I don't care if
there wasn't a clear conflict bias, right? And if there wasn't a clear catharsis bias, then I would 100% agree. We'd have.
I think here's the thing. I think conflict bias and catharsis bias is probably always with us, but it being monetized is what makes it fucking dangerous.
Absolutely. I mean, like, think about it in terms of societal development. Like, we're at the beginning of that. So what's that going to look like in 10 years if we continue down this path? Not great.
No, it's
not great now. It's going to be even worse when it's like, brain implants and people are telepathically swatting each other,
the one thing I'm happy about is that the futurists are wrong about their utopian stuff so much of the time, because everything that they like, I'll give you an example of that. I had nightmare dreams about Google Glass.
Right. Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
I was like, this is pre everybody going crazy. But I'm like, I can't imagine what 24-hour Facebook and Twitter on my glasses would be like. No, do not approve. Also, now everyone knows what I see too. They already know where I'm at. Like, oh my God, what we give away for free and information, the Stasi would have killed for.
Which goes back to the Patriot Act, that once that was passed, we gave up that right for forever. And we definitely talked about that last time.
Yeah, we did. Well, that's another. That's one of the two things in American political history that I was like, look, I have two unpopular opinions amongst current young people. One of which is the Patriot Act really was a big fucking deal, and it really did matter. And I hate that now the only people who still talk about it are like weirdos like Alex Jones, who actually don't even believe. They don't have any principal opposition to it anymore, because they would totally love for Trump to use all the shit in the Patriot Act.
As long as it's their guy, it's okay. Which is which honestly, like, that was the case with a bunch of Kucinich supporters too, where it's like they were fine with it as long as it was Dennis Kucinich as president. I'm like, well, no, I'm still against it, even if Dennis Kucinich is president, which would never happen, to be clear.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
But I think that is one of the most momentous moments of the last 20 years, and not in a good way. But and also,
my other one is neoliberalism ended in 2009, and no one and like we're living in we don't know what we're in right now. Period. That's the other unpopular opinion, because I'm like, we've been supporting the market based on QE for like a decade, and now it stopped. Everything's fucking weird, which means we don't really know what's been holding our economy up for 10 years. So
is that like the ghost ship philosophy?
Yeah, it's like we looked down and it fell. Like,
yeah.
No,
I mean, I'm not again. I mean, again, like it's I don't get too into that kind of stuff, just because I do not have the same views as a lot of people that I'm even close to. It's not that I don't disagree necessarily. I just don't think it's important for me to express that. It's based in logic. It's based in situations where if it's something that I feel like I can comment on, I will. But I think honestly, you can say that most of the things that we deal with in society are due to corporate interests.
Oh yeah, totally.
And it seems reductive, and no one likes to hear about that, because it's like the same, whatever. Like, how long has Nader been saying that? But it's 100% true, and it's there's a pure through line through all of it, which is why it's hilarious to see like all the right wingers get mad at like the social media corporations, where it's like, I'm sorry,
weren't you tired this stuff, guys?
Yeah, it's like free market. This is like literally this is what you said you liked, except for the fact that now it's not benefiting you, don't like it. And it's like, well, then that comes back to like, cool, well, is it is a private enterprise or a public square? Well, that comes into regulation. Is it regulated or not? And then like when we start talking about that, they're like, wah! And I'm like, look, these are valid questions. If you're an actual free enterprise capitalist, you should be able to answer those questions and not have an emotional reaction to it.
You would hope.
Well, but you'd be wrong.
Right. I mean, I think about all the free enterprise talk, all the free speech talk. I mean, like, this is easy fruit, and I mean, a lot of people pick it, but it needs to be readdressed. DeSantis is literally selectively censoring corporations for political opinions.
Yeah, Disney is catching the flack, which I'm like, wow, I didn't have that.
I mean, it's funny because I was like, I actually agree with what DeSantis did with Disney, but not for the reason why he did.
For the reason, exactly. Likewise, I was like, I kind of support this, but I don't want to say that I support this because people will assume it means something else. Yeah,
right. Absolutely. Well, also because I also know like that's no consistency to this whatsoever. But
it's whatever the outrage of the day is, and then showing that he's quote unquote taking action on it, and that's enough for the masses.
Right. Well, the problem that you have is like for years I always heard these people say, and this is conservatives and libertarians. I realize libertarians are barely around anymore, but they all became nationalists or liberals depending. But
there's still some, but there's
like 5. No, like they all work at like antiwar.com or at like
are real busy working on the consent laws.
Yeah, well, yeah, those guys. But to be fair, there was a time period on the left where we did that shit too for different reasons. But I'm glad we don't do it anymore. For people who go, what? And I'm like, there was a time of because consent laws were usually tacked onto sodomy charges that leftists opposed age of consent laws because they were mostly used to targeted queer people. But we're not in that context. We haven't been in that context since at least 1999, and actually really since about the mid 80s. So, don't resurrect those arguments, people.
It's not worth.
Really not worth. That's a weird here. I say that because I know leftists to die on that argument. I'm like, why aren't you hanging out with the libertarians? I mean, like,
maybe that's not what you should lead with.
Yeah. I'm not saying I know what you're doing this for, but this is a weird argument to make. So
I say that a lot on the internet.
Yes, for real. But it is really interesting. Back in the libertarian days, because everyone would say capitalism isn't racist, it will eventually want to expand its markets. And I'm like, well, now that it's actually doing that, you're pissed off.
Yeah.
Like,
it's woke capitalism. Yes. And I'm like, isn't the whole point of capitalism is like to sell you the rope for
right? I mean, like, I have
fun, man. Like,
I'm actually kind of pissed that the right stole that from me, because I'm like, woke capitalism is when capitalism is cynically anti-racist and not really cares if it does shit, but does trying to find a new market. But no, you guys just like, well, capitalism isn't supposed to have social values. You don't even believe that. You guys support Christian stores, idiots. Like,
I mean, exactly. Well, and it's so absurd. Like, so what you have is like, okay, well, here's here's Walmart. Well, maybe not Walmart, celebrating gay pride through like changing the colors of their website or something, which is like, what? Are you fucking kidding me? Like, and people be like, no, it's progress. I'm like, is it though? Is it really? Like, I mean, is this like what we settle on instead of actual like justice? And
oh man, Pride Month gets harder for me every year, and I'm like,
awful.
It's just like, I'm now like, oh look, Zion Bank has a rainbow flag. I'm just like,
great.
Like, it's. I mean, it is a sign. It's a sign of social progress in so much that it's been that normalized, but it's also one of the things I remind people, though. I'm like, you guys see this, and because of our media bubbles, you forget that while 70% of the population is at least neutral, if not pro what you're doing, the 30% that used to be the 50% just, I don't know, 15 years ago, they're still alive.
Yeah, they're still around.
And if you read any newspaper comment section, you will see them.
Yeah.
Or go to a church on a weekend when no one's like, it's not a progressive cool church. Go to like, you can still find that stuff. And I remind people, like, it's not like, even if with this whole like, and this is a massive cultural shift, 70% support, right? Even most conservatives. But when I say, well, maybe not most, maybe about half, but when I say that, I'm like, 30% of 380 million people is a lot of fucking people.
A lot of people, yeah.
Yeah, like,
well, and that goes back to people only behaving as if the people that they regularly interact with are all the people in the world. Right. Which is the same reason why, again, people forget this. Like when Obama won against Romney, a bunch of people were upset because it's not that they didn't understand that Obama won. They don't understand how he could have won, because that was the beginning of like the societal bubbles. Put that into overdrive and like give it a bunch of steroid treatments, and that what you have is like for 2016 election, right? I mean, and then put it up to 2020. They have people that flat out know that could not have happened. Like now that's just like a flat out alternate reality. And it's easier to believe when all you see are people that also believe exactly how you believe and think exactly the way you think. It's easy to feel that way. It's easy to feel like there has to be some outside force that is causing that. But it's not. It's understandable where that came from.
But you know what? Yeah, I think the other thing about social media dynamics that make it,
and that comes back to, again, understanding, not necessarily empathy too, because empathy
right.
can be.
No, I am. People have been confused by this, but I've actually argued that you need less empathy in your life, and people are like, what? And I'm like, no, like And actually,
I agree with that, by the way. And I say that as someone that like I consider myself a relatively empathetic person. I 100% believe that it will only end in tears.
Right. I mean, even some of it's like stuff that I don't think people realize that I mean, because like being empathic also sometimes leads you to hate people because you can see yourself in them, and then you're like, well, why the fuck aren't they better? And you want to destroy them. Like that's a real side effect of empathy.
And you see it a lot in online and terminally online folks. 100%.
Oh yeah, well this is the other thing I was about to mention. The other weird thing about this bubble world is when you get out of it, who do you encounter? You don't encounter like normie conservative you've known for 20 years and have a long conversation with and know that like they're not out to kill you.
Yeah.
You encounter a lunatic on Twitter. Like, so who may actually also in some other places be a normal conservative who in non-lunatic terms you could have some kind of conversation with. But you see their id first, and there's no prior social communication.
There's no context, there's no nuance, it's just both barrels.
And I know it because like there are times I remember particularly during COVID, when I go over and look at right-wing world, I'm from right-wing world, I know it, and I'd be like, holy shit, I need to buy a gun. Right. Like right now. In fact, I don't just need a gun, I need 5 guns. And like, and I need to like booby trap my house and put in and then I'm like, Derick, you know, you live in Utah, you know people, you know this is not what people are actually like.
Yeah.
But even I, you sound all arrogant, but honestly, when you go in and see that first, you're just like, they want to kill me. I want to kill them back. Like, and I'm just like, okay, think reasonably, and also don't try to like, what are you seeing right now? Like, because I also think about like, well, if I show a rando left Twitter, holy shit, like,
it's
not pretty.
It's not. I mean, if you show me random, I'm
gonna say,
like,
you just go and vision of some of your co-hosts' Twitter feed someday, and you're like, oh my god.
We've had discussions. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
You at least not do it from the show account.
Oh yeah. I quit a job because of that.
I remember.
Because it wasn't even necessarily that said person said it, although I was mad about that too. It was, you said it from our business account.
I have a serious problem with that, and that makes it all the more bizarre when all of my creative enterprises ostensibly are under my name. That like, and that's something that I made the choice to do, and I chose to lean into the controversialization and then lean into the idea of creative aspects and identity being one thing now that was just forced into existence. And if it's going to be that way, it's going to be on my own terms. But by the same token, I realized that like I have a tendency to not get too incendiary. One of the reasons why is because it doesn't just reflect on me.
Right.
And it's, that's like the grand unified theory of Conan Neutron, but like that's how I have to conduct myself, which means that I don't have the freedom to unload on idiots on the internet.
No, I mean, I actually had a long conversation with Jason Miles once when I talked about my ethics of this, because I told them like in very rare situations, there are some, where I will call out an individual. You don't see me call out people or do the subtweet game very much unless it's positive or ironic.
Totally. Yeah.
Like I normally only share. I don't.
But my favorite was today. I'm going to immediately date this show because Biden said he was going to forgive all this means tested student debt forgiveness, but $10,000, and then Mitch McConnell like tweeted some fucking Mitch McConnell horse shit, right? Which of course just immediately gets everyone mad at him, and like actually builds the case. But Internet Hippo was like, he should just forgive 10% more debt every time somebody complains about it. Which I was like, that's great.
Yeah,
that's perfect for me. I'm like, A, hilarious, and B, yeah, you should do that every time someone complains about it. You know, if there was a Wall Street Journal op-ed about it, 10% more debt. There you go.
Yeah, it's
keep talking, bozo.
Yeah, I mean, it is means tested. It's but you know what? When I talk to someone about, like, I do controversialize, but what I don't do is I try to avoid whatever the Twitter trend of the day is. If I really think something is negative or dangerous, I will generally not mention it directly. I will have occasionally subtweeted people who are talking about it, but I agree with what they're saying. Yeah. There's an ethics to this, and there's a subtlety to this. Otherwise, you should and also, like you, everything I do now is under my own name.
And it's going to be scrutinized as such and treated as all in present tense. That's James Gunn.
Yeah. So
I mean, and he was doing that stuff back when, like, that's what Twitter was for, is people working on their tight five, you know, just like, oh, let's random people being funny, you know, of some of which was risque, and then pulled out of context and got him to be fired off of movie, which is, you know, I want to get into the cancel culture argument, but like, that's the fact that the key to that is that it all happens in present tense, and we don't know what the future context will be.
I am so glad everything I wrote before 2008 that wasn't published in a book is no longer available. It's just gone.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll own up to what I said, but I don't want people discovering it. I'd rather them hear it from me.
I definitely had a moment I was like, did I delete my live journal? I'm not sure if I did. I should probably make sure if I did that.
So I still have a live journal that is private, that's still around. Oh my God, it's still around. That's crazy that I still have it, but I do. I don't use it anymore. I will occasionally go in and watch The Barren Wasteland, because there are still like 5 people who have
they're still on it. Just ghost shipping their way through. I mean, it didn't get like sold to like Russia for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's still in Russia, I think, but it's not. What's I think one of the weirdest things is the people who still use it, but they use it to blast their tweets out. That's the stillest thing, and I'm like, I know you set this up like 12 years ago, but like, why?
Yeah, that's
like, but yeah, I mean,
diminishing returns, but
yeah, it's a weird. I mean, but that's blogging in general. Like, I quit.
But who knew, like, that we would like long for the day that you would actually be able to select whose posts you would see and actually see them?
Oh yeah, oh my God! Like I also like I long for the day when Facebook wasn't so kludgy that it still worked at all. Well, like, you can't even, like, except for the day that you get the year in review, you can't even look up your own post.
It's meant to be purposefully ephemeral, and including Facebook Messenger, which I'm increasingly frustrated by people that want to conduct band business through that medium, where I'm like, this is not an archival form, and this is like, can we just please do this on email? And then they continue to use it. I'm like, why are you doing this? You're making this more difficult for me.
Can we at least move it to Signal or something?
Yeah, I mean, just like, first of all, yeah, like, I don't want this to be like Facebook's property, which is what it is when it's on Facebook Messenger. And additionally, it's purposefully meant to be for chat now, to be ephemerality, to drive engagement through that. It's not meant to be an archival medium. So, but definitionally, when you're talking about things that are like logistics and resources and contractual obligations, things along those lines, it has to be an archival resource. Which, yeah, I never figured that I'd be powerfully advocating for people to go back to email, but here we are.
Yeah, well, I'm an old person who still keeps. So when I do research, I kill trees.
Right.
So, people like have asked me, like, why don't you script your stuff? And I'm like, I do script it, but kind of when I do my solo blogs, but I'm actually physically writing it on physical real paper, like and they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, it's still that's how I first draft, man, and that's how I even first draft this, and you don't want me to do that, but I it's interesting because I have thought about the ephemerality of a lot of this increasingly. I can tell you a couple of examples of that. I publish poetry. There's like 25 poems in my CV
Mm-hmm.
that I do not have any evidence anymore that they were ever published, because that journal was moved online. They moved their archives online, and those are gone.
Dead
And
links now, yeah.
Yeah, and the Wayback Machine may or may not have it. So I have no, like, there's no proof anymore, and it's weird because my old mentors were like, you shouldn't publish online. Now we all publish online. There's the only way to get anything out. Yeah. But I now kind of see why they were being snobby about it, which was dumb. But I now see another argument in which they were kind of right, because like anything that I have in print, I still have. I can produce. I can prove that I did it. It's in the world. There may only be like 5 copies, but they are archivable. Some of this stuff, in fact, I know this for a fact. I had someone I knew used some of my poetry in a paper that now the only because I didn't keep the masters of this, because this was like 5 computers ago. The only copy of that poem that exists is in a printed version of a college paper that was from like 15 years ago, because the originals are no longer in print, and they were never in print in the meat space. They were only in print digitally.
Yeah.
So like they're just gone. And there are also, I had over 6 years worth of podcast archives that when a company changed hands, no one knows where they're at. No one knows. No one's even quite sure who has legal ownership of them, whether or not I still do or not. Like, so it's
that's why I save everything in archival form in multiple locations.
I do now. In fact, now I have, for all these videos, there are 2 physical hard drives that have them on it, in case for some weird reason. I mean, it's still digital, it still can go away. But if I don't know, YouTube decided to purge half the internet one day, which it could totally do.
Totally happen.
There are copies somewhere. Like
that's key.
Like, but yeah, and music has got to be even more like that now.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially when most people are not recording to tape, right? So it's digital mixes, digital masters. For myself, again, like every mastered record that I have, like I make sure it's on multiple drives, multiple locations. I don't, because it's my old band. I have 2-inch tape up on the shelves in the basement, and 1/4-inch tape for the mixdown. Like, and I have all that, but it's not something that putting it to that archival form would be expensive, and to the point of being like, I'm not that paranoid yet.
Right. No, I'm not quite yet either, but every now and then
every once in a while you gotta wonder, right, where it's like, well, but I do have those. I have the analog masters of all the records as well. So basically, let's say that there's some massive global power thing where I'm trying to, why can't I think of the term?
EMP.
Faraday cage. EMP. Yeah. I can tell you what could stop it, which is a Faraday cage, but I couldn't think of the thing. Say like it's an until the end of the world scenario, right? Like that movie where like all these services are just gone now. Well, our records could still be in print because you can still make vinyl, and like we have like the vinyl masters of everything that you can just immediately, without a moment's hesitation, do. And then things will be back like how it was in the 60s.
Yep, I still, because of what I'm telling you about those early poems of mine, I now have, even of everything that's never been published, a box with multiple drafts in physical form, and I still
that are on paper, right? Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like, yeah, like there isn't a thing where like, a bug showed up and suddenly any Microsoft Word file won't open, right? Crazy.
Because now I have lost stuff permanently to the digital void. And God, when people were like, move everything, I'm still not doing this. Everyone's like, put it on cloud. I'm like, fuck you, OneDrive. No. Like, absolutely not.
Hard pass on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Like, yeah, and they're like, we're gonna make your physical drive smaller. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna buy like 4 terabyte drives. Go away.
I'm gonna buy an external drive and put it on that. Problem solved. Yeah, like
if I have to, we're gonna be laser agent this binary code in the rocks. I don't care. Like,
whatever it takes. Like, I just don't trust you. I mean, I do not have any inherent trust of cloud storage, cloud computing, because all evidence has shown that it's completely unreliable. And I'm not saying be a Luddite.
Also, this is where I get with Dwayne Monroe and I talk about this all the time. It's also still physical somehow.
It's
there's still a physical server somewhere holding this shit. Like,
it isn't the cloud, it's just someone else's computer.
Right.
And it may be a very fast computer with multiple redundancies, with very fast throughput and a fast connection, but it's still someone else's computer.
Right. So it's just like, it's not like there's this void of space that you're sending stuff out to.
Yeah, it's not the negative zone, right? Exactly.
It's just not your computer.
Right. And that's yeah. For me, it feels better having local storage. I still maintain my own music library too, and I'm not as diligent about that as I used to be, but I still do maintain my own music library. And if I do really like something, I will buy the digital files of it. And
me too. Or I'll buy sometimes I'll actually even buy physical media and digitize it. But I have somewhere like 0.5 terabyte of music from stuff like that.
I have a lot of rip CDs in digital and MP3 form. Lots.
I kind of wish I'd kept my teenage CD collection because it was impressive, and I still have most of those files. But in the earlier period of this, I was dumber about all of this stuff and thought, well, I mean, CDs scratch, the computer kind of doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. There's all this rationale for it. I mean, and it's whatever. I mean, like, it's like when people have strong thoughts about how people should be listening to music or whatever. It's like, however people listen.
People who really care about vinyl confuse me. I like vinyl, but
I do too. But whatever. If you want to just like listen to it on YouTube, whatever. It doesn't matter to me at all. I mean, it's just, for me, it's all about however you engage with it, then engage with it.
Yeah,
and worry about the mechanism less of it. There are ways to support artists that everyone can do. And that isn't just ethical capitalism. That's also being a communication outlet. That's being a filter. That's telling people aloud or on the internet, hey, I think this is great. I like this because of X, Y, and Z reasons. I think you might like it too. And people are not trained to do that. So it feels weird.
Yeah, it's actually interesting about, I mean, I kind of know this from human psychology, but it's one of the interesting things about Twitter. Because I've had Twitter for 10 years, but if you look at until I started this stupid show, you would have seen maybe 100 tweets in a 10-year period. I would read it occasionally.
Yeah.
That was it. I was addicted to Facebook for a long time until the pandemic, and then that broke that because that was crazy making, and I didn't want to go down a weird crazy making hole. But everyone I know who was too online during the pandemic got real weird.
Yes, and that's a whole separate podcast. But yeah, I can tell you some tales.
Yeah, I mean, like that. I might actually do a podcast on that.
Lord of the Flies stuff, practically. You know.
Yeah, but I'm also afraid that everybody who I'm talking about will know I'm talking about them. So, that guy did that. Who's that guy? Nobody. You don't know them. Yep. They're not anyone on my friend's feed. Goodbye. But it's actually interesting though, because I started trying to change my habits around this actually during that time period where I was like, I'm going to positive tweet stuff.
Yeah.
It really is hard to do because people don't engage with it.
People just don't engage with it, which is,
it's a weird training. Horrible. That wasn't always true either. I do remember earlier Facebook, like I would endorse stuff all the time. In fact, I remember like actually, it was before Cambridge Analytica scandal was part of it, but I would like constantly post like my positive book and movie reviews on Facebook constantly, and they were all like, I have a rule that like if it's not a 3, I'm probably not gonna waste my time commenting on it.
I'm the same way. I'm be like, look, I didn't care for that at all, but I don't need to yell about it.
Right. And no, like people used to engage with it, and now they don't. Like it's very odd. Like I'll endorse a movie, and now I'm actually like trying to train the Twitter algorithm, because there are people I know who do a lot of positive movie stuff, and I'm liking everything they say. Because
I have done the same thing, and what I've noticed is now I see their negative reviews.
Yes, it's like
showing me that I don't care about that.
Right. But it's because their negative reviews are being rewarded by other people. But yeah, it's exactly it's maddening, because I'm always trying to like, I want to see, like, I sincerely want, I have a community of like, I don't know, 3,000 people who follow me on Twitter. I follow like a fourth of them back. I would hope that some of them listen to something interesting, or like watch a TV show that's good, or
people are, and if they do respond, it's to yes and something rather than to initiate themselves, and that's something that I think people need to think more about. And I get, because it sucks to like feel like you're putting something out of the void like that, especially when you're like, hey, I think this show is cool, or I think this band is great. But
I'm really into this 70s French horror movie.
Right, exactly. But you'll never know also like who can like pick up on that. And I think it's worth doing if we want to live in that kind of society where we're not just hate clicking and torches and pitchforks all the time.
Yep.
Like it's for me, it's shameful that Morbius almost was normalized as a film
because of hate clicking.
Because of hate clicking and people being like, what they felt was like sardonic or whatever. And it's like, why would you do that when like an Everything Everywhere All at Once exists that like honestly, could use your support to get this like weird nuanced film that like is not, has managed to like touch nerve, but is not going to have like a major intellectual property budget behind it. And it doesn't even have to be that. It could be like, RRR or something, or like whatever. Like there's plenty of things you can put your focus into that build something up rather than just
what's interesting
celebrating the whatever
the bad stuff. Yeah, like I'm not complaining about Jurassic Park movies or Jurassic World movies, whatever one. Like
I think the one thing I said is congratulations to the Jurassic Park movies for finally making dinosaurs uninteresting.
Yeah, that's well. I mean, it's hard to do.
That was pretty good.
But
and I said that after how many of these goddamn films have they been? I like one of them, and it's the first one, and that's it. And there's like a couple that are tolerable, but like I'm like, why are you making these movies, and who is the audience?
The people irony watch so much stuff, and that I'm like, like it doesn't, for the bottom line, that doesn't matter. People, you need to watch stuff you like.
Exactly. That's the bane of my existence. I have back and forths with certain people on the show about that too. I'm like, I'm not ever gonna. If I hear something's bad, congratulations, I will not watch it.
Right. Well, if I'm talking about it and I think it's bad, it's also because I enjoy it for some reason.
Yeah, which isn't to say that something I suppose can't be bad and you can get some value out of it, but then it's not. But then definitionally, it's not bad.
No,
it's something that you enjoy a certain type of like
weird
low budgets, so horror movies or whatever, and that's fine.
Like the thing is, I don't irony watch anything, but there are some things where I'm like, this is terrible, but I like it. So I guess it's not terrible, but by my objective standards, it's not good.
You get some enjoyment, watchability out of it, despite it like not being like well made, not having a great narrative structure, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed early Green Day. It's not objectively good music, but it's objectively terrible music, I guess. But that's the thing. I actually don't know that I actually make that distinction really. Like, in some ways, if something's that basic and it's still interesting to me, it says something about at least the time period and the emotional relationship to the time period, and it struck a nerve in some way at the time.
You have a relationship to it, And there's something to be said for that, and that's hard to denigrate.
Right.
People shouldn't do that.
I'm kind of tired of the bad movie podcast because I'm like, yeah. So, like, what's the point? There's so many good movies, and this year is interesting, particularly because we're finally seeing the steam run out of the goddamn comic book movies. I'm not a hater of comic book movies. Like, there are some good ones, but I'm like, it would be like the only other thing that I can think of is like this is westerns in like the 50s and 60s.
Action movies in the 80s too.
Yeah, okay, yeah, action movies in the 80s.
And that's like, what I always bring up. I'm like, were you equally as annoyed by like the constant stream of like mid-tier?
I actually kind of was at the time, even though I was very young.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that we're losing steam, not because I think these movies necessarily like are bad. Some of them are bad. Some of them are great, actually. There's some great comic movies. It's that I just want some space for something else.
Like, agreed. And like I make a special point
Todd
of like
Phillips, like that Joker movie is shitty, but Todd Phillips made a Joker movie so he could make a Scorsese movie, and the only way he can make a Scorsese movie about neoliberalism is by making it a Joker movie.
Is to make it in that context. Yeah, I mean, like, the Suicide Squad is actually like a very deep, like, sardonic satire of like American foreign policy, disguised as a supervillain movie. Not even a superhero movie, supervillain movie, and it's very well done. And it's funny, and actually doesn't forget to be entertaining, which is something that like blows my mind. That so many of these films are just like, why is this a joyless slog? This is terrible. But
yeah, I think with DC you have the joyless slog problem, and with MCU you have the even somehow you've made Taika Waititi.
you've leveled him up. Yeah, the
like that's how you do.
Down, right? Yeah, exactly.
Like Taika Waititi's not always good, but he's always interesting, and that wasn't interesting. It's just boring. Not bad actually by any stretch of the imagination. It's a competently made movie that has you can still tell it's him, but it's barely. And so what I've been worried about is this whole, when we're talking about streaming, for a little while streaming looked like it was going to save the mid-tier movie, and it kind of was, but it doesn't like it's going to continue. I mean, like, except for really niche services like Shudder.
Yeah, well, so that's what we're going to start seeing. We're going to start seeing more things like Shudder, which is to say that it's like, here's the niche. It's going to be in the name. This is like the place where you go to see these kinds of movies, right? Like, and that's sad to me. That actually bums me out, because I'm coming from the perspective of having the experience of going to the video store and seeing all the different, and then you have like the section that's like the people in the video store. These are the stuff we recommend, and those are the ones like, oh wow, that's cool. Like, we have that, and I think you get a little bit of that with things like Letterboxd and whatnot, where you can sort of like pick and choose the folks that you like. Okay, this person's hilarious. We have the same taste. Cool. I'll like watch what they're watching. And if they say something sucks, maybe I won't rush out to go see it immediately. But it's still completely balkanized. Like, there's a million services, right? And it's like, okay, this one's on Peacock and this one's on HBO Max. Oh, but now it's not on HBO Max because they like got rid of it in this latest IP purge. Right. I mean, it sucks, but here's the thing. This is the world we chose. And if we didn't want it, then we should have stopped it. And again, I'm not saying that like you or me or any of the listeners or viewers of the show are that way. But as an aggregate cultural total, we decided that it's okay. So if you don't like it, do something about it.
Right. Well, I'm going to end on a positive note, because
that's a bummer. Totally... That's not Lars von Trier bummer, but that's a bummer.
No, I'm actually just like I'm normally a bummer, but I was just complaining about everyone being negative all the time. So I'm now going to try to be positive, even though it's forced. But so when I do art shows, though, I really try to have a final question where I ask someone now, like, what do you endorse, or what brings you joy that you don't think a lot of people know about? Don't ask this on political shows, but I do ask it on art shows. So I'm asking you that question, and you are a curator of music, so I know you got something. So
yeah. So I guess the question is kind of where to go. I mean, I think that I do have an answer for that, and I'll ascribe it to bands, but it works with any art form. I love to see when something really cool, something really intrinsically beautiful from the heart, from whatever it is, when it finally finds its audience and connects. I just really love seeing that, and that's something I never get tired of. And I've seen it happen with a lot of bands on, on a sustainable level, on a mid-tier level, on like a huge level. I've seen it happen with movies. I've seen it happen with like shows, with like podcasts. Like it makes me happy because that's the dream, right? Like that's what we were sold, is that like, hey, you have this ability to connect with your natural audience, but we all know that there's a number of reasons why that doesn't always happen. So when it's something, especially when it's folks that are doing the work and putting the stuff out there and you see it connect, that really makes me happy in a way that like, I actually am not a cynical person. I'm a smart ass, but I'm not a cynical person. And I ultimately I'm I'm an affable misanthrope. is the best way that I can put it. And part of the reason why is because I have a song on the last EP, the one that just came out, "The Misplaced Optimism of the Doomed." That's me in a nutshell. Right? Because if you do the thing and you really, really believe in what you're doing, then it doesn't matter as much as if it connects. The point of doing it is doing the work and just doing it yourself. But ... when it does, God, that is really something. And so that over and over again, I love to see it. Not obviously, I love it for my own work as well, but I mean, like, I love it for anyone that's operating in a format and really playing from the heart, so to speak.
Awesome. That's a good way to answer that, because you are a curator and you could actually offend people. So
I can name names, yeah, absolutely.
So
and then people feel bummed out for lack of omission,
yeah.
and I'm like, I didn't mean to omit you, I just was on the spot, sorry.
But that's a good way. That's a good place to end on it. I may be the opposite of you. I think I'm not a misanthropist, but I think I am deeply cynical. So it's like I'm like
yin and the yang.
Right. I'm like, I love people. I just am a cynical motherfucker about the way people actually act. But it's I often talk about like how there is a weird amount of freedom to try to build a better world when you're not hoping for one. Like, it's so whereas like, and I'm not an accelerationist or any of that nonsense, but I am sometimes like, just don't assume you're going to get what you want, not because you're not actually, but because if you do assume it, there's a chance you won't fight for it.
Right.
And sometimes the fighting for it's pretty important.
So which one is Professor X and which one is Magneto between the two of us then?
You're probably that's
I had to bring it back to superhero movies.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I'm normally Magneto, but between the two of us, it's like, ooh, it's actually sort of like which one of us is what period of Magneto?
What period? Yeah, exactly.
And now are you classic Magneto, or Chris Claremont Magneto, or 90s Magneto? Like, which one are you? I am probably very Chris Claremont Magneto, but I always sympathize with Magneto. Whenever I would read the 80s X-Men, I'm like, but Magneto's right.
Magneto's right. Exactly. I totally had that moment of it being like, well, he's supposed to be the bad guy, but like, he's kind of has a point.
60s Magneto is like if Malcolm X was genocidal, so it's harder to,
exactly.
but like 80s Magneto is like, it's like, no, but he ain't wrong.
Like, not wrong about that. Yeah, exactly.
Well, you know what's interesting was realizing that Chris Claremont wrote that as a David Ben Gurion versus Proto Netanyahu.
Yeah. The other one whose name is
not Jacobinci, not the terrorist, but like, and interestingly enough, this is going to be my little bit of pop cultural spreading of happiness. The Jonathan Hickman X-Men has been the first good X-Men run since
it's so good.
Maybe 1996.
I 100% agree. The last X-Men run I really liked before that was a Grant Morrison run.
Yeah. Actually, that is it. Grant Morrison run is brilliant, but like the Whedon
they were
one,
just in the wilderness for so long. And it's so good because they managed to actually like take the things that made it great, but like put it in a different context and in a way that's like made you rethink a lot of things. And if you're trying to storytell, that's a good thing to do.
I was afraid that it was going to be like a one-to-one pro-Zionism basically argument, but it's absolutely not.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to end up, if we're going to talk about a mainstream, that's the first, in fact, for Marvel in general, Marvel's done some interesting stuff in terms of representation in their physical books, but they haven't really been interesting to me as like storytellers in a long time. Even stuff like Black Panther was kind of getting lame.
I mean, it was what I thought it would be, and I enjoyed it. But like, it's not gonna, I'm glad y'all got up to like what Black Panther and Wakanda is.
Yep, cool. But and like,
it's not an end goal.
Like early Bendis stuff is sometimes okay, but in general, like I've been like, you guys have been actually, interestingly, they've been edgelording in the way that like DC movies do for a long time, but then also like trying to be bright and happy at the same time, and it just doesn't work. So
and again, replacing some aspects of storytelling with just like snarky comments, which is like,
it's just gets old. It gets old.
Not everyone needs to be wisecracking all the time, or there's no point to it.
Yep. But just to say, the Hickman X-Men, and it's not just by Hickman. There's a bunch of other writers, but it's consistently good.
It's really good. Like I gotta say, like I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking that the other day. I'm like, God, this is like, I think people will be into this even if they don't think they're into comics. Like this is just fucking interesting. Like it's sort of like how to build a society to a certain degree, and then like the challenges that come from that, and the challenges from having like like literally talking about like negotiation with other countries and things along those lines, but like going for it in a way that like this is probably how it would go, and not everyone would go along with it.
I mean, you also
and they would be a superpower, of course they fucking would.
They're basically it's basically like, imagine Israel, but if Israel had 1,000 nuclear bombs from moment one, like, and also nobody in it can die.
And that's exactly.
And so that's
cool. Like the only thing I can think of that's remotely like it is Miracle Man.
Yeah.
Well, how it got there with the later stuff, where it's like, oh no, like this went a different direction. Now they're attempting to build a utopia. Okay.
I'm actually the last time I've seen comics deconstructed this way actually was is early Grant Morrison and mid-period Alan Moore. So you're dealing like 30 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. That's
like,
you don't normally get to tell those kinds of stories, but I mean, I tell you, man, the X-Men needed it. That
I have
life support.
I read it. I read it out of loyalty, also because it was the property the MCU forgot for a long time. But it was. Do
you remember how they were pushing Inhumans so hard, and then Humans offering was just so universally bad and reviled? They're like, yeah, never mind. But they tried to
figure
make
out a way to work out
Inhumans.
with Fox. Yeah.
They're like, we'll make it work with Fox. We'll bring mutants in. Like, this isn't gonna fly.
The thing with the Inhumans is like, one, they're not a good proxy for the X-Men anyway. They're like super being eugenics program.
Which is like kind of sus to begin with. Whereas like with X-Men, it was all about civil rights and race relations ultimately.
Right.
Like, and like being feared and misunderstood. Whereas Inhumans is literally just like, okay, so did the Kree still like try to create these folks, or are we doing something else with it? Because
it was something else. I mean, there are characters in Humans. I will say my favorite Marvel Comics character is the one in Human who doesn't have superpowers because he already has a superpower, and that is Karnak.
Karnak's great.
His superpower is, I think in such systems, I see the flaw in everything.
Yeah, he finds a systemic flaw in anything or anybody. Yeah,
right, and he doesn't
awesome.
have it from the eugenics program. He just
he cultivated it. That's just how he rolls, which is great.
Yeah, I love that character, but the rest of them are like, okay, Black Bolt doesn't talk because it'll destroy the planet, and everyone else is a weird eugenics project. How is this cool again?
Yeah, Miss Marvel came out of it, so
yeah,
Miss Marvel's cool. But like, ultimately,
I mean, honestly, though, I guess it kind of makes sense from the Marvel perspective because the Avengers sucked for 30 years too, and yet somehow they made that interesting.
Exactly. I think that all the time. Like, that was not the cool book, man.
No, like the Avengers was like the Justice League shitty version. Like
that was like, how do you know like a comic reader is a cop? Because they read the Avengers. You know? It was like nobody reads the fucking Avengers, man.
That's true. Well, now we've really nerded out.
I was gonna say, now that we've done like a separate little podcast about comics, I'll talk about it all day long.
Yeah, well, I'm a comics fan, but I have weirdly high standards now because Image doesn't suck, and but I will say comics have not been served by becoming movie IP at all. And so I miss when comics in the 80s, and this is what I just said about the Hickman run, but when comics in the 80s was so lost, they were basically like, okay, let's just try to make it, I don't know, art. Like, because we're not making money anyway. Yeah. And that was a super productive time for comics. And
ended up making like better product, better things.
Yeah, way better. Probably like go back and read Silver Age comics, people. Like 70s comics are painful. Like
absolutely.
Like 30s comics are not, weirdly, but those 70s ones are like, oh my god, they're just awful. But they also were aimed at 5-year-olds, so
there is that.
Anyway, thank you so much, Conan.
Great to have you, brother. So great to be on. Thanks for having me, man. This is it's always a blast. Never know quite what we're gonna do, but it's always entertaining as far as I'm concerned. So hopefully the audience feels the same way.
I hope so too. So check out Conan's EP. It is available on Bandcamp. I probably will put the Bandcamp link, or at least the link to your page.
Yeah, neutronfriends.bandcamp.com. You can find all the rest of the Secret Friends stuff there too. All the tour dates are up. Come if you're on the West Coast and we're playing one of the cities that you're around in. Come see us. We're playing with McCluskey, 3 of the dates, which should be pretty big. And we're playing a bunch of other dates as well. And then we got some stuff on the East Coast in October. And probably going to be, I think, by the Chicago and Louisville shows will be over by the time this airs. So we already went down to the South and it wasn't that many dates. Sorry. So 2023.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm just glad to be doing it at all, frankly. So
probably when you got to like Atlanta and Nashville, and that was pretty much it.
We did Indianapolis, Louisville, Nashville, and Atlanta. Yeah, that was with service, and that was fantastic. Although it wasn't fantastic, that was the dead of summer, frankly. But
that's the wrong time to tour the South.
That's what I said. But it was a good time. It was a good time. It was hot.
Go to the South in the fall.
Look,
No,
man, I appreciate yeah.
I will. This will be my last anecdote. But
sometimes you just go along to be like, all right, that's sure, yeah, let's do.
My ex-wife would always, when we lived abroad, we'd always come home every 2 years, and we come home seasonally, one place and the other. And for some dumb ass reason that I never understood why I agreed to this, we went to Wyoming in the winter, and to Georgia in July. And I was like, why are we doing this to ourselves? It's negative. Yeah. It's in the cold where Celsius and Fahrenheit are the same. Yeah, not great. And it's too cold to snow. And literally, I mean, it was so cold one winter in Wyoming that
where your nostrils freeze. That's never a good sign.
Oh yeah, but it was so cold, but it's so dry you don't realize it. So we go into this room and we got it to 25, and 25 Fahrenheit felt warm.
Oh yeah, shorts weather.
Yeah, and I'm just like, you have broken me. Like,
yeah, it's no joke, man.
But yeah, and then Georgia, it's 110 and 90-degree humidity. So,
yep.
Anyway. On that note, it's good for your skin, though, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose so. Sure, exactly.
On that note, we're going to end the show with the chill close. Have a good night. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, brother.